Upon obtaining power, Milaneo ignited the sun, and the sorcerer Frid summoned a spirit. If the first gave vital force, Frid granted peace. Thus, the world of the Huber Empire was created by their hands. The current imperial family of the Milaneos and the Frid archdukes are the only ones capable of governing the spirits in this empire. Huber Princess Dorothea Milaneo is interested in history. She reads books. But she is quite skeptical about what is written in them. From her constant occupation, Dorothea is distracted when her older brother, Prince Raymond Milaneo, runs into the library. The boy apologizes to his sister for distracting her and suggests they play together. Dorothea remembers how, in a past life, the true heir to the throne already died by her hands when she was a cruel tyrant. Now, Dorothea is living her second life, granted as an opportunity to amend everything. And she does not want the past to repeat itself. This time, everything must be the opposite, and her goal must be a life where she is good. A lesson she learned. Good deeds are rewarded with happiness and bad ones with misfortune. On that occasion, Dorothea was the true evil. She killed the crown prince and seized the imperial throne, destroying everyone she disliked, and granting wealth and power to those she pleased. But when the protagonist obtained everything, only the end awaited her, for the one she loved hated her and chose death. And the people with whom she shared her power suffocated her with the same force. So Dorothea accepted death with joy. But suddenly, fate decided to grant her a second chance. And the girl was reborn. Determined to live differently from now on, the princess understands that she must now tolerate her brother, no matter what he does. Rai hugs her affectionately. He is proud of how smart and well-read his sister is. In the boy's mind, there are only flowers and butterflies, but he received more than Dorothea just by being born a prince. Raymond keeps asking Dorothea to play with him, and then the wet nurse arrives to help her, advising the boy not to distract his sister with her studies. The wet nurse notices that Dorothea is studying the history of Ubery and is impressed by her knowledge. The princess recounts what she knows about the spirit stone that disappeared during the time of chorus. The maid cannot stop being amazed by the depth of knowledge of the little princess, and wishes the emperor would find out about it. Dorothea's heart stops as she asks the wet nurse not to reveal her existence to the emperor. The emperor is her biological father. However, the word feels alien to her as she doesn't feel his presence. Although they are united by blood, for Dorothea it is of no importance, as she failed to inherit the Milaneo right. Dorothea's mother, Empress Alice, passed away shortly after her birth. So Karjan ignored her, considering her a painful memory of his deceased wife. Before, the girl did everything to get her father's attention. She fainted in front of him and showed off her intelligence. She did everything possible to surpass Ray, but her father never even looked at her. However, with Raymond it was different. He received gifts and dined with the emperor without needing to do anything. He could ask endless questions and smile. And Dorothea didn't understand why the emperor preferred Ray. Dorothea couldn't accept that the emperor never looked at her despite her efforts. That's why she could only calm down when she tortured Ray and took his belongings. As punishment, the emperor locked her in a room for a month. And over time, their relationship became a vicious cycle. Dorothea desperately craved love. But her feelings remained useless, like trying to touch the moon with your hands. Thus, the seeds of evil were fed by anger and guilt and sprouted, bringing more suffering. Her envy and greed, her ability to walk over others, all this gave rise to the tyrant Dorothea Milaneo. However, in this life, the girl realizes that it is useless to blame others for her own sins. In this life, she will decide to be good. The wet nurse insists that she leave the library and walk in the garden. She suggests visiting Alyssa's homeland garden, which the emperor built for his wife. Longing for her homeland. Before her reincarnation, she used to visit that place often, but she hasn't done so for a long time. So she obediently heads to the gates. Suddenly, she hears the emperor's voice, angry that some people are heading to the garden. So much time had passed without seeing his daughter that he didn't recognize the princess in the little girl. The wet nurse rushes to present the girl to her father, but the emperor is dissatisfied with Dorothea's manners, who is saddened by not receiving a proper greeting. The woman claims that the girl is surprised by the encounter with the emperor, when in reality she excels in protocol classes. Dorothea lifts the skirt of her dress and curtsies, greeting the emperor with due formality. Emperor Karenin asks what the princess's specialty is, but she modestly declines. Upon learning from the wet nurse that Dorothea knows the entire imperial genealogy, Karenin demands that she reveal everything she knows. The girl refuses, and an exchange of words erupts between father and daughter, each convinced that the other is testing their knowledge. The emperor keeps insisting that she reveal everything she knows. Dorothea insists that she is only saving time for the emperor, who has been so busy until now that he hasn't even visited her. Suddenly, Karen changes the subject, ordering the girl to ask for anything she desires. Knowing she cannot remain silent, although in this life she needs nothing from him, Dorothea asks her father to prepare the best wine and name it in her honor. The emperor reprimands the nanny for a girl so young talking about alcohol. Dorothea defends the maid, saying she read something about it in a book about Balak. The author recounted how the protagonist drank wine with his beloved, and Dorothea became intrigued by trying it someday. Karen is surprised by the young woman's knowledge and promises to grant her wish if she recites the genealogy. Otherwise, he will sentence the maid who lied to him to death. Although Dorothea clearly inherited her dominant character from the emperor, this time she obeys, because she decided to be good, and her act will determine the nanny's fate. After that happened, the nanny hoped the emperor would show interest in his daughter. But he hasn't visited her so far. The maid explains Karen's attitude as a consequence of his being busy. But Dorothea feels relieved not to see him, as he spoils her mood. Suddenly Ray appears, and, begging the maid not to reveal his presence, Dorothea runs to hide from her insistent brother. Hiding behind a column, she overhears her brother boasting about his ability to manipulate the spirit of light. The spirit of light is the force that once ignited the sun, exclusive to the Milaneo family. Although it is now weakened and only lights small flames. Over time, some family members cease to be able to control the spirits. And the princess is one of them. Raymond is saddened not to find his sister, as a friend has come and he wanted to introduce him to Dorothea. The princess decides to escape stealthily through the back door of the garden, and runs without realizing someone is in the doorway. The girl runs into a dark-haired boy with a red tie and falls to the ground surprised. The boy worries about the girl falling, apologizes, and Dorothea, upon hearing his voice, cannot believe what she sees. In front of her is him, the man she loved more than anyone in the world before her reincarnation. The man whom her greed destroyed and who hated her more than life. Pushing away the memories that surface, Dorothea looks at the boy again, who is still apologizing and trying to help her up. Without realizing it, the princess, who never stopped thinking about him, utters the boy's name. Theon. The boy is surprised that she knows his name, since it is the first time he sees her. However, that thought vanishes when he notices she is crying and tries to calm her down. Seeing his sister crying and the boy kneeling beside her, Raymond rushes at full speed to help her. Anxiously, the prince grabs Theon by the tie and shakes him violently, thinking he hurt his sister. Dorothea separates the boys, claiming she cried because something got in her eyes. Theon is surprised and impressed to realize that the girl turns out to be a princess who bravely stood up for him against her brother. Raymond apologizes to the boy for misunderstanding the situation. The boys make peace and Raymond introduces his brother, his new friend Theon Fried. He bows to the princess and kisses her hand as a sign of respect, apologizing again for the incident. Dorothy looks at Theon and thinks of a new beginning for their relationship, hoping that in this life he will finally pay attention to her. But an acquaintance boss calling Theon interrupts her sweet thoughts. Turning around, Dorothy sees Julia de la Vigne in front of her, Theon's first and last love in her previous life. Due to an agreement between the families and Dorothy's stubbornness, Theon had no choice but to marry her. But he loved her until his own death. And that was Dorothy's past life. She longed for her father's love but couldn't get it, and she longed for Theon's love. But not even he gave it to her. Even after the wedding, Theon continued writing to Julia secretly from Dorothy. The protagonist prayed for Julia to disappear, die, and not be able to be with him. She rejoiced when a loyal servant, with a proven record of loyalty, brought Dorothy the news of her husband's mistress's death. The young woman deceived herself with the illusion that now her beloved would visit her, but he escaped from her arms, preferring death. And right now they are here, next to her brother, happily talking about something. Dorothy notices that Theon and Julia are surely together in this life too, because they are holding hands. Afraid that her thoughts were reflected on her face, the princess turns around and runs away. Her brother tries to stop Dorothy, but she flees with tears in her eyes from the people whose deaths she caused in her past life. Running to her room, the princess immediately throws herself onto the bed and asks the wet nurse to leave her to rest. The next day, Dorothea is in her room and follows her usual reading with interest. However, she cannot concentrate because Raymond is pacing nervously back and forth. Unable to bear it any longer, the princess closes the book and demands that her brother calm down and stop moving. Raymond shares with his sister his concerns that tonight he will officially receive the title of Crown Prince. The boy understands the importance of the event and becomes distressed, feeling that he does not deserve that title. Raymond thinks his sister would be a much better candidate, as she is much smarter and more talented than him. Dorothea denies this assumption, as she does not know how to summon spirits. Raymond is sure that his sister will learn soon, because she is very perceptive. The prince asks Dorothea to wish him luck, as it matters a lot to him, but he finds no support in her. The succession ceremony is one of the most important events in the empire, in which the emperor's next heir will be announced. Before the ceremony begins, Dorothea sits and observes the design of the palace, which now seems simple to her. Suddenly, the emperor appears, and the princess realizes she no longer feels any emotion. She looks at the scepter's hilt, where the spirit stone has disappeared, and recalls what she heard before the execution, that a fragment of it was found somewhere. Now that has nothing to do with her, and her attention focuses on the prince entering the hall. Raymond slowly approaches the emperor, looking restless, and Dorothea fears he will forget his speech. The girl is displeased with her brother's performance and how he manipulates the spirits. If she were in his place, she would not make such a mistake. The ceremony comes to an end, and the emperor leads the crown prince towards the assembled guests for the celebration, while Dorothea follows them in silence. The ladies observing her admire the princess's beauty and remark on her resemblance to the late queen. The emperor, hearing this, becomes furious and orders the guests to stop talking nonsense. Dorothea is saddened upon hearing this, but cannot leave the place due to protocol. At the center of everything are Emperor Karen and Ray, while Dorothea is treated worse than a candle fixed to the wall. Before her reincarnation, she would have risen to the center and demonstrated her importance, highlighting how foolish Ray was next to her. However, now her mind is empty of those ideas. She only wishes for this to end soon, but someone approaches her. Upon raising her head, Dorothea sees Theon standing in front of her with a glass of pomegranate juice in his hand. The princess is happy about his presence and that he came alone. Theon suggests she drink the juice and offers her the glass. They walk around the hall, and Theon comments on how Raymond had praised his sister to him and her knowledge. The boy believes that now they will be able to meet at the Epistemia. The Epistemia is the best academy in the empire, where only the most outstanding talents study. Furthermore, it is the main place where descendants of noble families, by studying together, forge contacts for the future. However, unlike Ray, who easily entered this academy, Dorothea was not allowed to attend for fear that her knowledge would overshadow that of the prince. Once, in her past life, she tried to resist by throwing a stone towards Epidemia, but it hit a window and struck the head of the Duke of Bronste's eldest son. After that incident, the emperor locked Dorothea in the castle, and thus their relationship ended. Therefore now, to avoid repeating the past, the princess decided not to enter the academy on her own. Upon learning of Dorothea's decision and looking at the prince, Theon understood everything and decided not to continue the conversation he had started. To avoid looking humiliated in front of the boy, the princess quickly changes the subject. However, the conversation about the weather that had just begun is interrupted by Julia, who arrives suddenly. The Archduke looks for Theon, and the boy apologizes to the princess for having to leave. Dorothea is saddened to see Theon leave so quickly and considers leaving the event and retiring to her room. The girl approaches her father, who has his back to her, to ask for permission to leave. The Duke of Bronsted, who was talking to the emperor at that moment, turns around abruptly upon hearing her voice. Making a clumsy movement with his elbow, he hits Dorothea's glass, and the juice spills all over her dress. The girl is saddened, as that glass was a gift from Xion. Now the juice is wasted, and she is completely stained in the middle of the crowd. The Duke hurriedly apologizes to the princess, but the emperor insists that Dorothea apologize to him herself. Ray, who had been paying attention to the incident, decides to intervene and declares his sister innocent. However, Dorothea, who decides to behave according to her mission from now on, bows to the Duke and apologizes for her clumsiness. Bronete is ashamed because the young woman apologizes to him when it was his own fault. The emperor orders the servant to take the princess to change, and Dorothea is happy, as it is a perfect excuse to leave the event. As she leaves, the princess notices the stares fixed on her, and turning around, she sees Theon's surprised eyes. And Julia. Ashamed that they witnessed her losing authority, Dorothea flees the banquet hall. The young woman sits on her bed with her knees drawn up and thinks that she can endure her father's treatment. But Theon's gaze is unbearable to her. Thoughts of Theon and the certainty that he will never love her are interrupted by a knock on the door. Prince Raymond has come to visit her, as he is worried about his sister's condition. Dorothea gets angry with her brother and demands that he leave her alone, insisting he return to the event. Raymond refuses to leave, as the party in his honor means nothing to him. He wants to be with his sister. Hearing the prince suggest they go out and play, Dorothea can't resist any longer and jumps off the bed. She reprimands Raymond for his irresponsibility, since as crown prince he must behave with dignity and stop thinking only about games. She grabs his cloak and pushes him away forcefully, begging him to leave and let her be alone. Suddenly, Dorothea realizes that Theon and Julia have witnessed her unpleasant scene once again. It turns out that Raymond invited them to play all together, but now she can only think of her own shame. She slams the door shut in her brother's face, preventing him from saying anything more. The princess closes the door behind her and collapses, crying exhaustedly. She hates herself and thinks she looks pathetic, that she doesn't deserve love, but understands that this is her path of redemption. Dorothea has been lying in bed for days, exhausted and feverish. The wet nurse takes care of her, but Raymond hasn't come in the whole time, probably annoyed. Dorothy sits in her room, reading a book, worried about having been so rude to her brother. On the one hand, she is glad he doesn't come because he is so intrusive. On the other hand, she promised herself to be kinder. Suddenly, the door opens and Ray appears in the doorway with a package in his hand, which he brought to Dorothea as a gift. The boy tells his sister about his secret vegetable patch he planted behind the yard. And now he gives her the tomatoes he grew. The prince boasts about his achievements and promises to bring the next vegetables first for her to try. The princess is annoyed that the prince, accepted into the episteme, is wasting time on vegetables. The boy convinces her that he also studies and apologizes for angering her. Full of emotion and fidgeting with his hands, Ray shares with Dorothy his feelings that she never plays with him. Remembering that from now on she will be kinder, Dorothy explains to her brother why acting like that he cannot be a good emperor. She promises she will do everything possible at the episteme and be a good sister, and suggests they go out because she worries he is always in the castle. Raymond enthusiastically describes to his sister how wonderful it will be to go out to the city. But she refuses. After that, the prince constantly follows Dorothea's steps wherever she goes and invites her out for a walk. He leaves her no space, leaving notes on the pages of her books, asking her to go for a walk. Unable to bear that insistence any longer, Dorothea agrees to go out, but on the condition that she goes alone, accompanied by her nanny. The nanny, excited by the princess's decision, dressed her in a formal gown, in which the girl felt a little uncomfortable. However, the nanny had waited so long for this day that no one could stop her or make her change her mind. And so, they go out together for a walk through the lively market square. The nanny suggests Dorothea take her hand, as there are many people around. The girl feels uncomfortable, since in her previous life, no one had ever held her hand. They end up at the observation terrace, from where the whole city could be seen. Dorothea looked at the beautiful landscapes and the happy people walking through the city. However, in her mind she saw another scene. In her memories, it was a city devastated by war, and even the wind smelled of blood. Now she looks at the musicians in the square and thinks that this is what the empire looks like without a tyrant. The nanny suggests they go see a performance, and passing by a carriage entrance, they don't notice that someone is watching them from there. Dorothea is on the floor with her hands and eyes tied and hears two male voices. The kidnappers, angry that the girl's clothes cost more than their dinner, plan to demand a ransom for her, although they don't know who she is yet. During a walk, the wet nurse took the princess to all the shops and bought her a new hat. Realizing that the girl didn't like dressing up, she decided to take her to a bookstore. After leaving the bookstore, the maid suggested they go eat delicious desserts and take a shortcut through an alley. Suddenly, a man who had been following them approached from behind and brandished a club over the wet nurse. Dorothy saw the woman, staggering from the blow, fall flat on the ground, and she ran to help her. The attacker covered the girl's mouth with a handkerchief soaked in some aromatic liquid. Now, tied up, Dorothy thinks she doesn't want to die at the hands of such villains. According to the conversation between the kidnappers, 3 days earlier they had sent the wet nurse for money. But there had been no news from her yet. Surprised to discover she has been there for 3 days, Dorothy thinks the emperor will surely abandon her and won't try to save her. The princess decides to take the situation into her own hands and shows signs of life so the kidnappers notice her. One of them approaches the girl, removes the blindfold from her eyes, and greets her kindly. Dorothy pretends to be a silly and innocent girl, and thus finds out the man was named Tito. The girl bombarded him with silly questions, like if he would be her nanny and who he really was. Tito answered charmingly and patiently, introducing himself as her dad's friend. Dorothy asks permission to call him Uncle Tito, while thinking about how to kill him. Upon hearing compliments about her appearance, she recalls her past life. Then, she knew someone who always told her similar things and asked her to smile. Looking around, Dorothy asks the kidnapper where they are and discovers it is Tito's house. Then, noticing a scar above the man's eyebrow, she distracts the kidnapper by complimenting him and asking where the scar is from. Sitting next to the girl, Tito starts telling incredible stories about how he fought 17 enemies alone. Looking closely around, Dorothy asks Tito for something to eat, as she hasn't eaten in 3 days. The man consults with his friend, but the latter opposes feeding the girl. Tito seats Dorothy at the table, and only now does she fully feel how weak and hungry she is. The second kidnapper gets up from his seat and puts a knife to the princess's throat. Grabbing her hand, and there is Dorothea again, against the wall with her hands tied, while the criminal returns to his place. Suddenly, he screams and abruptly moves away from the table, noticing movement beneath it. Dorothy observes closely to see what scared him so much and spots a scorpion. The kidnappers stay aside, trembling with fear, and the girl suggests they hunt the scorpion in exchange for bread and milk. Tito, with trembling hands, unties the girl so she can help them. Grabbing sticks for gambling, Dorothy captures the scorpion, not understanding how 2 men could be so scared of it. The kidnappers ask the girl to take a scorpion out of the house. And going up the stairs, Dorothy understands that the house is underground. On the way, she cannot understand why they let her go so easily alone. But upon leaving the house, all her doubts are cleared. Wherever she looked, it was impossible to know where to flee, because everything around her was an endless desert. Dorothy sits down and eats the promised bread and milk. The kidnapper, whose name is Danny, stalks her. And suddenly Tito enters the room. The girl overhears the criminals talking, behind her, about the news that the princess has disappeared in the capital. Dorothy is frustrated to discover that someone from the castle revealed her disappearance. And now the kidnappers won't let her live, because otherwise they themselves won't survive. Realizing she won't be getting help from the emperor, Dorothy decides to take control and, when the kidnappers leave the room, she stealthily approaches the closet. Finding Danny's backpack, she takes out a knife and decides that will be enough to defend herself. Hiding behind the door, Dorothy overhears Danny sending Tito to look for camels. And he personally takes care of the girl's murder. Realizing her fate is sealed, the princess understands she has no other choice but to use that knife. Upon entering the room, Danny realizes the girl is not at the table and tries to find her. Dorothy runs towards the kidnapper from behind, holding a sharp knife firmly. Jumping as high as she can, she lunges and sticks the tip of the knife into Danny's shoulder. After landing the blow, Dorothy understands that she is very weak and the wound was not deep enough. The man turns around and fiercely grabs the girl by the neck, lifting her off the ground. Danny presses Dorothy against the wall with one hand, and she completely loses her balance and the ability to defend herself, holding her with one hand. With the other, he snatches the knife from her hands, and she falls to the ground. Dorothy's strength fails her. The kidnapper screams at her, and slowly, anger invades the princess. She gathers strength and pushes the man away with her legs against his chest, moving him away from herself. Denny falls, and Dorothy, without wasting time, and snatching up the fallen knife, wounds his leg. He begs for mercy, and she remembers that look, the one of someone looking at a beast. Remembering her promise to be good, Dorothy quietly asks him to just leave her alone. She turns around and leaves by the route she already knows. Dorothy leaves the house and looks at the desert she will face, with the only wish that everyone leaves her alone. The princess advances straight towards where her eyes are looking, as the sun begins to set. It gets dark and Dorothy feels terror at her helplessness, as there is not a spark in the desert. And she cannot control the spirit of light. Exhausted, the girl lies down directly on the sand and feels absurd, as even now she thinks that if Ray were in her place, they would have already been rescued. Upon opening her eyes, Dorothy realizes she has been unconscious for some time. She looks at the stars and suddenly perceives a flash moving towards her in the distance. Hearing the galloping of hooves, she gathers strength and stands up, regretting not having died. However, the will to live overcomes the will to die. And standing up, Dorothy despairs and waves her hands, crying for help. The girl's strength lasts little, and she falls flat on her face, with her face buried in the sand. Through her half-closed eyelids, she sees people in knight armor approaching. And she hears the murmuring of voices speaking to her. Upon opening her eyes, Dorothea sees the vague silhouette of a familiar lamp and realizes she is in her room. Suddenly, she hears the emperor's voice and sits up attentively in bed. Behind the ajar door, she spots her father and the wet nurse, who is telling the emperor how they were attacked along with the princess. Dorothea is moved to know that the emperor came for her and that they were almost killed. However, the next instant, all her feelings vanish upon hearing her father complain that she causes him too much trouble. The emperor orders the wet nurse to identify the one who leaked the information and officially deny the rumors of the princess's kidnapping. Dorothy sits on the bed and thinks that, despite her good behavior, her father doesn't love her anyway. The princess believes that everything she suffers is a punishment for having been a tyrant in her previous life. A few days later, the imperial doctor informs Dorothy of her weak state, despite the reduced fever. Next to the doctor is a maid whom the girl doesn't know. Dorothy is saddened to realize that her wet nurse was fired, as she knows she was not at fault for what happened. The wet nurse had always taken care of the princess, and now all she could do was hope that the woman would be well. To recover quickly from the shock, the doctor suggests the princess go rest in a quieter place. and serene. She is proposed to go to the domains of Narration, and suddenly she understands that it is a magnificent opportunity. Now she can leave the palace and get away from Karen, Ray, and Theon with Julia, who will soon go to the academy. Deciding that she can regain her strength there, Dorothea announces her intention to go on vacation. A knock is heard at the door, and Raymond appears with a bouquet of garden roses for his sister. As he did every day since her kidnapping. The prince discovers that Dorothea plans to go to Narration to the beach. He becomes sad and does not want her to leave. Raymond feels guilty about Dorothea's kidnapping, but she tries to convince him otherwise. To dissuade her from leaving, Ray offers to help her with her admission to the academy. The prince is unaware that Karen ordered Dorothea to refuse admission, so he keeps insisting, realizing that he is doing it with good intentions. The princess insists that she needs treatment. Raymond, whom the tired Dorothea asks to leave the room, looks at her sadly and leaves. Only a few days have passed, and the princess is ready to leave, grateful for Karen's indifference, which allows her to flee the castle so soon. Suddenly, a voice interrupts her thoughts and speaks to her. Turning around, Dorothea sees Theon, who smiles at her and tells her he heard about her trip. The princess responds reluctantly, as she absolutely did not wish to see him now. Theon puts his hand in his pocket to take out a gift he prepared for the princess. The boy offers her sweets he brought in case the princess gets sick during the trip. Theon is sad about not being able to see the princess often, but hopes she recovers soon and returns to the capital. In her previous life, Dorothea felt nothing like this. It seems to her that she likes Theon, but she tries to forget those thoughts. The princess turns around and hurries to leave, uncomfortable with those thoughts. As he watches her leave, Theon clenches his fists hoping to meet her again. Sitting in the carriage, Dorothea convinces herself to remain cold and not get carried away by feelings. However, she cannot get out of her head that he cared about her and brought her sweets for the journey. There is Dorothea, on the balcony, listening to the sound of the sea and breathing deeply upon leaving the imperial palace. In this place there is no trace of her former life as a tyrant, and perhaps here she can start anew. In the domains of Narration, a maid from Carlotta Castle watches the princess. She also introduces her to the knight, Stefan Greenwald, who is also assigned to serve under the princess's supervision. The girl looks at him and recognizes him as the knight from her previous life, who reached the rank of that captain in the best knightly order, and she killed him. Dorothea observes him and understands that, if she is 18 years old now, he has barely just joined the order. And instead of rising, he is now guarding her as a guard. That's why Stefan looks sad in Dorothea's eyes, and she extends her hand to him as a sign of respect. As a sign of friendship, the knight pats the princess's hand. Sitting in her room, Dorothea decides to write down a list of criteria for a happy life. As she scratches the paper with the pen, she realizes she doesn't understand what living a happy life means to her. She decides to consult Clara, who brings her tea with cookies. The maid opines that the first step is to obey one's parents, but that criterion does not apply to Dorothea. Glancing at the princess's notebook, Clara discovers she plans to write a wish list for a happy life and starts laughing. Getting angry with the maid, the princess orders her not to mock her. Clara convinces the princess that she is not laughing maliciously, but because she finds Dorothea's attitude tender. Clara suggests she start smiling more, and Dorothea realizes that, until now, she has had no reason to do so. However, the first thing she imagines when thinking of a good person is a smile. So Dorothea tries to smile, but after a few seconds of effort, her lips cramp. Dorothea dismisses the servants, saying she needs to think. Picking up the pen, she starts the list, putting as the first point to learn to smile kindly every day. As the second point, she notes not to covet what belongs to others, and to remember that the throne belongs to Rai and Sion to Juana. As the third point, she commits to saving 1 million people and hearing words of gratitude 3 times a week, in addition to donating money to charity every month. Having just written it, Dorothy reviews the list to check that for now it is enough for a successful life. Tired of sitting, the princess stretches and goes out to the balcony to listen to the sound of the sea. She informs the servants waiting behind the door that she plans to go for a walk towards the water. Although Dorothy wished to walk alone, Stefan follows her anyway but walks in silence and does not bother her. Suddenly, in the distance, the girl sees a person sitting on the beach, resting on his knees. Surprised that there is someone else around. Upon approaching, she recognizes the blonde boy and identifies him as Edom Bront. In her other life, he was the main counselor of the tyrant Dorothea Milaneo and the most handsome man she knew. In wealthy circles, they called him the golden-eyed angel, and everyone, both men and women, wished to speak even a couple of words with him. So magnificent he was. The loyal servant, willing to act only for Dorothy, offered her everything she loved. It was he who helped her get rid of Rhea, and then killed her of his own accord. And he did it with everyone the Empress hated. He alone understood her feelings, and she thought she had only found a faithful servant. Although he longed so much to occupy Xion's place. However, he probably didn't do all that just for her, since when Dorothy walked towards her execution, many people declared Aiden innocent. With his tongue, like a snake, he obtained amnesty by claiming he was under the tyrant's power. Upon getting closer, the princess thinks that in this life it is better to stay away from Eden. However, upon looking more closely, she notices that the boy is crying bitterly. Dorothy is surprised, as this boy looks nothing like the one she knew in her previous life. Suddenly, the idea arises in her that perhaps Eden also had the opportunity to live another way and not follow the path of evil. The princess approaches the boy. He notices her and looks at her with worry and fear. Ashamed of the presence of others, Eden stands up and flees, ignoring Dorothy's pleas for him to stop. Here it is necessary to briefly mention Eden, the illegitimate son of Duke Bronit. The Duke accepted him into the family, but until he came of age, the boy could not attend the academy, nor was he allowed to show himself in high society. After meeting Eden, who was in the same situation as her, Dorothy feels tired and decides to return home. When the rumor spread in Sarashiana that a capital princess had arrived, the prominent families began sending her letters requesting visits. Dorothy makes short visits. All the ladies present are delighted by her beauty and charm. The princess quickly tires of the general interest and asks Stefan and Clara to take her with them. The Lady of Bronit, sitting nearby, invites Dorothy to visit them. Deciding that it is a great opportunity to meet Eden and guide him down the right path, the princess accepts enthusiastically. The next day, the princess visits the Duke's castle, where she is received by the Bronit couple. They invite her to a table full of riches, but looking around, she doesn't see him anywhere. Dorothy asks the castle owners about their son, but they reply that he is at the academy. Believing they were referring to George, she places her hands on her chin with a serious expression and announces her desire to see Eden. Upon learning that the princess saw the boy on the beach, the couple murmurs among themselves for a long time. They inform her that Eden is sick, but she insists on seeing him. They take Dorothea to a greenhouse, where a boy is sitting at a round coffee table among potted flowers. Hearing their approaching steps, he turns and stares at her with his golden eyes. For a few seconds they look at each other in silence, and then Eden smiles shyly at Dorothea. The boy stands up, greets the princess, and introduces himself, expressing joy at her visit. The princess bids farewell to her companions because she wishes to be alone with Eden. The boy asks what brings her to this area, pretending not to have met her a few days ago on the beach. Eden looks worriedly at her thin hands, and she affirms that she is getting better and enjoys living in the city. Dorothea analyzes every word and movement of the boy, but cannot discern if he is truly kind, or if he hides his feelings. Recalling his habit of raising an eyebrow when lying, the princess attentively observes his eyebrows. She compliments him and he, blushing, lowers his gaze, covering his face with his hand. Dorothea realizes that the Eden she knew before would not blush, but would act defiantly. Suddenly, unexpectedly, the boy mentions that he has not met anyone as wonderful as the princess. Dorothea now understands that she was mistaken, since what he is saying now could be flattery. Dorothea remembers that before she was always easily convinced by his sweet words. And now, determined to be his friend, she invites Eden to her castle. The boy, delighted with the invitation, jumps happily from his chair and, in an instant, approaches the princess to kiss her cheek. Dorothea notes with satisfaction that she will be able to add Eden's gratitude to her list. But at night, while writing in her notebook and remembering Eden's smile, she doubts his sincerity again. Meanwhile, at the castle, Clara informs Stefan about the princess's imminent birthday. Clara is excited. She wants to organize a wonderful festive day for Dorothea. Since Dorothea dislikes dresses and adornments, the maid tells Stefan her idea for a gift for the girl. Clara is excited about the upcoming celebration and asks Stefan to help her organize it. And so the long-awaited day for Clara arrives, who enters the princess's room sounding a festive pop-pop. The maid worked hard to prepare a table full of exquisite delicacies. Dorothea thanks Clara, who suggests they take a walk, as it is a wonderful day outside. The princess accepts and they head to the coast to enjoy the sea air. Suddenly, on the shore, they see a shell that Clara insists the birthday girl pick up. Dorothea decides that perhaps the maid hid the gift under the shell, as her words sound exaggerated. However, after examining a mountain of shells, the princess discovers nothing beneath them. Turning around, Dorothy notices that Clara is not nearby and seeing a distant outline. She believes the maid walked away. Upon getting closer, the girl realizes that a lion is approaching her quickly. The princess understands that it is Stefan disguised as a lion, but does not reveal it so as not to ruin the surprise. Dorothea remembers reading a difficult book, recently wrapped with the cover of a fairy tale about the hero Leo the lion. And clearly Clara thought it was the princess's favorite character. Remembering her promise to be good, Dorothea decides to pretend and gives the lion shells collected on the shore. Making a feigned expression, she asks the lion if his arrival has to do with her birthday. The princess experiences a feeling of care unknown to her until now, and sincerely thanks the lion. A moment later, the princess is in the arms of the mythical hero, who hugs her affectionately. Dorothy cannot believe that now the knight, whom she once mocked for choosing a bloody death in the name of the prince, is holding her. She sees similarities in their destinies, as Stefan also had to make his way by himself, by not belonging to the privileged circles. Reflecting on all this, Dorothy understands that Stefan has always been a good person and brave. It starts raining, and the knight disguised as a lion rushes to take her back to the castle so she doesn't catch a cold. The princess bids farewell to the lion hero without revealing that she recognized Stefan in him. After changing and drying her wet hair, Dorothy examines the letter received from the capital. Knowing it is a letter from Raymond, the girl throws it on the table, among a pile of unread letters she had received before. Stefan returns to the castle. They murmur something and feel happy that, as they believe, they have fooled the princess. Dorothea plays along and asks where Stefan has been all this time. The knight already had a prepared answer, that he had been training. But the princess doesn't give up and asks why he didn't prepare a gift for her. She wants him to teach her fencing as a gift so that, if a kidnapping happens again, she can defend herself from the attackers. Before, Dorothea hadn't worried about it, fearing that if she became stronger, she would desire more. But now she has realized that good people can also be strong. With his large hands, he takes the princess's small hands and agrees to teach her how to fight with swords. Months later, Dorothea confidently handles a wooden sword made by herself. The girl doesn't understand why Stefan won't let her use real swords, for fear of her getting hurt, or out of envy that she is so good at it. On another day of exhausting training, Dorothea is distracted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Deciding that Stefan is sneaking up to attack from behind, the princess turns abruptly and raises her sword. But she stops in time upon recognizing Eden, who is amazed by her talent. Since he himself doesn't know how to fight, Dorothea remembers that in her previous life, Eden had never held a sword, since he had many followers who did it for him. The boy is happy that the princess is improving and reaching out his hand towards her. wipes the sweat from her forehead with a handkerchief. The maids, peeking from the bushes, contemplate the two little angels tenderly. Eden takes Dorothy's hand and reminds her that she invited him to visit the castle. He asks her to show him the mansion, firmly holding the princess's hand. Thinking that her hands are surely sweaty, Dorothy heads to the bathroom to wash up. After showering and changing, she takes him to her room. The boy is impressed by the cleanliness and order of the princess's quarters. He looks around and rummages through his pockets before taking out the gift he brought and giving it to Dorothy. The boy unwraps the package, and Dorothy sees in front of her a magnificent gold necklace covered in rubies and diamonds. The princess understands that it is a very expensive gift, but Eden comes from a ducal family and, evidently, he can afford it. Dorothy politely refuses such an expensive gift, as she only desires sincerity from him. Eden feels disappointed by the princess's refusal, as she clarified that such gifts are better for loved ones and close ones. The boy confesses that, evidently, he got too excited that someone approached him first. And Dorothea realizes again how skillful he is at manipulating human emotions. Turning around, Iden sees letters on the table coming from the imperial palace, and he asks the princess about them. Without having opened the letters, Dorothy assumed they were full of complaints about how difficult it is for Rue to study at the Epistemia. Pushing away the thought of Rue, the princess suggests Eden leave the room. But suddenly, she stops by the vanity. Dorothy turns and sees that the boy is right in front of Thion's handkerchief that he left for her at the imperial reception. She rushes to the vanity, grabs a handkerchief, and hides it in a drawer, hoping Eden didn't see the initials embroidered on it. Obviously, the boy had already seen the handkerchief, as he promises Dorothea that he will give her one just like it next time. Approaching the door to leave, Eden casts a final silent look at the vanity. The next day, while having breakfast, Dorothea perceives a certain tension hanging over the castle. Clara advises her to return to the imperial palace, as a terrible contagious disease has spread in the city. Many are dying from this disease, as the medications to treat it are too expensive for common people. Dorothea hesitates, as she absolutely does not wish to leave this beautiful place where she feels so calm. The princess understands that it is an excellent opportunity to expand her list and decides to help people with doctors and medicines. Having so much money, Dorothea can finally do something good for others. A couple of weeks later, Clara happily informs the princess that thanks to her, the people suffering from the infection have recovered their vitality. With tears of joy, the maid praises Dorothea's kindness, as Eden suddenly appears beside her. The princess doesn't know whether to consider the spending of money, of which she has plenty, as kindness. But in gratitude, she receives gifts left in front of the palace. Eden convinces Dorothea that people repay kindness with kindness and will always remember her as a kind princess. Until now, she had never felt that she had done something good, but now she happily perceives the gratitude of others. Dorothea invites Eden to stay for dinner. She asks Clara to prepare the gifted potato and to plant the sprouted potatoes in the garden. 3 years later, Dorothea continues to train fencing intensely with Stefan and makes great progress. However, this progress remains insufficient to defeat Stefan. Apparently, in her previous life she succeeded because she was older. Noticing that her shoulder is exposed, Dorothy lunges at the knight and raises her sword above him. However, Stefan blocks her blow and stops the impact of her handmade sword. Dorothea is furious, because if it were a real sword, he wouldn't be able to grab the blade with his bare hands. Meanwhile, at the Epistemia, Raymond laments having written another letter to his sister, who has not replied to him in 3 years. Theon approaches, gives him a friendly pat on the shoulder, and reassures him, assuring him that Dorothy reads his letters. The boy suggests to his friend that they go visit the princess, as the holidays at the Epistemia will start soon. Raymond is enthusiastic about Theon's idea. He jumps for joy thinking about the upcoming meeting with his sister. Dorothea keeps insisting on asking Stefan to allow her to fight with real swords. Clara, who had been waiting for them for lunch, examines the knight's hands full of thorns with horror. She takes her to the bathtub and scolds her for being so absorbed in her fencing practice. The maid tells Dorot that the villagers still bring vegetables to the castle as a sign of gratitude. The princess looks out the window and sees a boy behind the bushes, who, leaving his bag, sneakily escapes the garden. Dorothea thinks about catching him next time and inviting him to dinner. From the capital city, new letters arrive, this time 2 at once, and the princess notices that one is not for her. It is addressed to Stefan, as the letter from the knightly order is directed to him. In it, they announce a promotion exam, which will allow Stefan to become a higher-ranking knight. It is good news, but it means that Stefan might leave Narration soon. Dorothea considers the exam a great opportunity for the knight and asks him to show her the letter. It mentions that the date of the exam is approaching, so they must leave this very week. It also states that the imperial palace will stop assigning the princess a personal knight for her protection. Dorothea asks Clara not to worry, as they live in a quiet place, and besides, Stefan taught her fencing. Clara leaves, and Dorothea praises Stefan, pointing out that it is a great opportunity for him, since by staying with her, he wasn't advancing. The princess wants to prepare a worthy farewell for him and asks him to stay until the day after tomorrow. The knight kneels before the girl, and she repeats her plea for him to stay longer. Stefan takes the princess's hands and, after a moment of silence, reminds her that he is her personal knight. He considers that his mission and obligation is to be by her side and protect her. Dorothea is moved, but does not understand why she is surrounded by fools who reject benefits and act against her. However, Stefan does not believe a man is foolish just for doing what he likes. Dorothea looks at him and remembers that he always acted this way, protecting Rhea even when it was obvious she had lost. Thinking that Stefan was always someone who makes foolish choices, the girl throws herself at his neck. She hugs her knight tightly, thanking him mentally for a decision no one else would make in her place. During the day, Dorothea goes to the square with Stefan, which is full of people today. Due to the crowd, the princess cannot see what is happening, and the knight picks her up. Being above the heads gathered on the wall, Dorothea sees an announcement for an amateur swordsman tournament. Registration for the contest started today, and the princess convinced Stefan to sign her up. The registration man mocks her, but the girl does not back down. He is angry about their argument and accuses her of being rude. Upon hearing insults directed at her parents, Dorothy becomes furious and barely restrains herself from exploding. However, Stefan immediately helps her, sticking his sharp sword into the table. Right between her hands, he orders the insolent one to obey the rules and, trembling, hands Dorothea the registration form. Leaving the shop, the princess happily thanks the knight and suggests returning to the castle. Meanwhile, 2 boys pass through the square. One walks ahead, scolding the second, loaded with boxes, demanding that he call him young master, and not brother. Suddenly, the boy drops the boxes, the contents break, which infuriates the older one. Dorothy turns upon hearing the noise and decides to do a good deed before returning and help the boy. Picking up the fragments, the boy cuts himself and screams, and the princess recognizes Eden's voice. Jonathan gets even angrier at his brother and raises his hand towards Eden, ready to strike. However, he stops when Dorothy intervenes between them, protecting the boy with her body. At that moment, Stefan grabs Jonathan's hand, and all he can do is get angry and struggle against the knight's grip. Satisfied with her good deed for today, Dorothy offers her hand to Eden and helps him up. The angry boy, not knowing that the princess is in front of him, is outraged that she dared to disobey the duke's son. Dorothy, determined not to be mean, turns away in silence, takes Eden by the arm and takes him with her. The princess thanks Stefan for helping her, and the boy is moved by her care. Eden, disappointed that she let go of his hand, decides to call her attention again and screams. Looking at him, Dorothy notices that his cheek is swollen, although he assures her it is common for him. Eden asks the princess to stay with him until Jonathan stops being angry. Dorothy does not recognize in this boy, who endures Guru, the Eden of the past, and invites him to her castle. As soon as the princess crosses the threshold, Ray, happy to see her, flies to meet her. Dorothy discovers that there are holidays at school, and the prince, taking advantage of the opportunity, decided to visit her. Ray leaps to her neck, hugging her and squeezing her tightly. And at that moment, Dorothea notices that the prince arrived accompanied. Theon is right in front of her. He does not hide his joy at the long-awaited reunion with the princess. Dorothea utters his name with surprise. He is happy that she remembers him. Meanwhile, Eden, standing some distance away, closely observes what is happening. Upon learning that Ray suggested to Theon that they go to Narration together, Dorothea takes him by the hand and drags him out of the room. Upon locking herself in her room, Dorothea listens to her brother's excuses, who missed her and wanted to surprise her. She reprimands the prince for causing a disaster by arriving without permission and also bringing Theon with him, and expels him. Raymond starts to cry, disappointed because he didn't answer her letters and worried about her. Angry at Ray's tears, and because of them she looks like a villain again. Dorothea grabs the doorknob to go out. Upon opening it, she comes face to face with Theon, who looks worried about the princess's behavior. Dorothea can't take it anymore and flees in a hurry, ignoring Theon, who tries to stop her. But he catches up and grabs her hand. Dorothea stops, her heart beats wildly in her chest. She had waited so long for him to grab her hand, and now he has it. But she cannot turn around feeling unworthy. Theon asks her to grant him a moment. He apologizes for the unexpected visit and admits that he really wanted to see her. Holding her hand, he kneels on one knee in front of the princess, expressing his desire to reconcile with her. Tears well up in her eyes, because in her past life she had asked Theon this many times. But he never approached. Suddenly, the silence between them is interrupted. Approaching Eden, complaining of a cheek pain, Dorothea apologizes to the guest for having forgotten him. She takes the boy's hand and takes him to get medicine. As they leave, Eden gives Theon a long look, and Theon returns the stare. Dorothy takes the boy to the room, asks him to wait at the door, and goes to the closet. While leafing through the drawers with medicine, she mentally blames herself for having fled from Theon in an ungraceful manner when he proposed reconciliation. Dorothy offers a vial to Eden, but he gives it back, thinking she needs it more due to her sickly appearance. The princess fears he noticed something about her attitude towards Theon, and Eden, leaning over her, whispers that he likes her. Dorothea pushes him away. She doesn't like those jokes. And Eden observes that, apparently, she is sick from not smiling even at such jokes. She throws him out of the room, and in the hallway she meets Theon again. Eden Bronite introduces himself and comments that the princess herself applied the remedy to his cheek. Theon Frid also introduces himself to Eden and intends to enter Dorothea's room. But Eden stops him. He explains by saying that the princess is very tired after the fencing classes and the walk through the city with Eden. To demonstrate his closeness to Dorothy to the surprised Theon, he mentions that he sees her once or twice a week. The boys stare at each other once again, and Eden, realizing he spoke too much, bows and leaves. Dorothy sits in the room, distressed by seeming foolish and incapable of even smiling at Theon, despite having practiced her smile so much. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door. The princess wipes her tears and opens it. In the doorway is Stefan. Dorothy invites him in. She sits him next to her on the sofa and asks him to listen to her. She tells him about her terrible dream in which she loved someone, but he hated her so much that she finally died in her room. Dorothy shares her fear that her destiny is to be mean, as she was even the cause of her mother's death. Suddenly, Stefan hugs her tightly, traps her against his body, and strokes her back sweetly. The knight affirms that the princess is a good girl, and she feels much better. And she feels calmer. With her nose resting on his shoulder, Dorothy thanks Stefan and silently apologizes to him for having killed him in a past life. Clara, searching for the princess throughout the castle, hears sobs behind one of the doors. Thinking it is Dorothy, the maid enters the room, but Ray is there. who is crying sitting on the floor with his knees together. Ray is sad because his sister called his arrival a catastrophe, and he feels like she hates him. It hurts him that in Dorothy's eyes he seems like a fool, when in reality he was only worried. And missed her. Clara tries to convince Ray that he cannot be an idiot, at least for studying at the best institution in the Empire. The boy admits that he ranked 80th out of 100 and doesn't know how to win Dorothy's love. Clara remembers that the princess didn't even open her brother's letter and thinks about how they could reconcile. She tells him that Dorothy loves fencing, and Ray decides to participate in the tournament to capture her attention. Theon enters the room and announces his intention to leave the castle, as the princess is sick. Clara, excited, runs to visit Dorothy, leaving the boys to rest in the room. Theon regrets his arrival, although Ray rushes to take the blame. His gaze falls on the bedside table, where he recognizes his handkerchief, given to the princess at the imperial reception. He was sure he had thrown it away, but now a hope is born inside him. Night falls and Dorothy, suffering from insomnia, goes out to the terrace to breathe and listen to the silence. She looks at the stars while playing with Theon's handkerchief, wondering if she should return it to him. A sudden wind snatches it away, and Dorothy cannot catch it. Bending over the railing, the princess sees it being picked up by Theon, who is walking in the garden at that moment. She blushes with shame and hurriedly informs him that she was going to return the object to its owner. Dorothy finally smiles, and Theon, flattering her smile, asks her to stay on the terrace. He checks the tree and begins to climb, getting closer and closer to the princess's terrace. He is now seated with his legs dangling, face to face with Dorothy, thanking her for waiting for him. The girl barely contains tears, as he always moved away from her in the past life. Now thanking her for not having done it herself. The princess offers him her hand and asks him to come up next to her, as it is not safe to be on the branch. And she worries about him. Theon does not understand Dorothea, but offers her his hand and gets down from the tree onto the balcony. The boy feels that the princess is uncomfortable with him, but she is quick to deny it. She admits she missed him, but didn't write because she thought he didn't like her letters. And now she is very happy to be close. Dorothea's heart beats wildly. All this seems like a dream to her, as he had always avoided her before. Theon confesses that he likes walking at night, something probably related to belonging to the Frid family. Dorothea remembers that in her other life, she also liked staying up late and taking naps. Theon wishes the princess a good night and hands her his handkerchief, which he picked up from the ground beneath the balcony. Dorothea thanks Theon, as she had never received a gift from him before. Upon returning to her bedroom, the girl clutches the handkerchief in her hands. Emotions overwhelm her. However, she pushes those thoughts away upon remembering that Theon belongs to Julia and noted it as a rule in her notebook. The next day, Dorothea wakes up when Clara's scream tears through the morning silence upon learning that the princess registered for the tournament. The maid tries to hide the real reason for her concern, distressed by the catastrophe that will occur if Ray and Dorothea face each other in the tournament. The time for the competition has come. The princess arrives at the square accompanied by Clara, Stefan, Ray, and Theon. Brother and sister look at each other and understand that both have come not to support each other, but to fight. Dorothea decides not to give up her desire just because of Ray and calmly prepares for the contest. The princess checks the list of participants and discovers she will fight against someone named Alex. And Clara is happy that her opponent is not Ray. It seems that the participants were distributed fairly so that the older ones would advance to the next round. Since the tournament is organized by the Bront family, Eden is also in the courtyard and overhears Dorothy and the maid's conversation. Upon learning that the princess has a very strong opponent, he asks his father to change the distribution, including participants with similar physical characteristics. Eden justifies this as an attempt to make the tournament interesting for the spectators. And the Duke praises him for the initiative. Upon learning that the distribution changed, Alex supposes that Dorothea fears his strength. The princess is sure that she can defeat the arrogant one and challenges him to fight against her on the tournament field. Dorothea asks the organizers not to modify the distribution chart and to leave everything as it was from the beginning. The contest begins, and the first to step onto the field is Raymond. He is excited and searches for her in the crowd. Upon seeing her, he beckons her, expecting her support, but she pays no attention to him. A signal is heard. The opponents face each other, and Raymond takes his weapon. Dorothea notices how his gaze changes, which always changes in important moments, although he usually acts like a naive child. Only 1 minute has passed since the start of the fight, and Raymond has already knocked down his opponent. Disarming him, Dorothea, ignoring her brother's shouts of joy, walks determinedly onto the field, where her opponent awaits her. Eden worries seeing that the distribution was not changed, as Alex is bulkier than her and could hurt her. The competition begins, and Dorothea, looking into her opponent's surprised eyes, only feels pity that the sword in her hand is not real. Taking advantage of his slowness, she disarms Alex, who is trembling, either from rage or astonishment. Dorothea is announced as the winner of the second round. The astonished crowd murmurs, wondering who she is. Theon, watching the fight with a racing heart, cannot take his eyes off the princess. Raymond admires Dorothea's talents, but she asks him not to publicly show that they know each other. The prince is sad. Theon approaches, and both chat about a possible meeting between brother and sister in the final. Both advance without obstacles to the final. And in the semifinals, the princess will have to compete against another novice, Joey. Dorothea looks at the boy who desperately wants to win, and he seems familiar to her. Upon starting the dispute, the princess recognizes him as the boy who used to leave vegetables on the threshold of her castle. However, his skills are not enough to defeat Dorothea, and he falls to the ground, desolate for not being able to win the prize. He is furious, as with that money he could have lived for a whole month, and he was even willing to sell his life for it. Dorothea considers it absurd and advises Joey to come see her if he ever has to sell his life for money, adding that the potatoes he brought were very tasty. And finally, the final, in which Raymond and Dorothea Milaneo must face each other. In front of his sister, Raymond offers first place without a fight, but Dorothea orders him not to give up. The princess is displeased that everyone is sure of her victory. She does not want to look weak in front of others. Clara does not know which of the children to support, as she worries about both. Dorothea receives a blow to the hand, feels intense pain, but quickly regains her composure. Raymond is very worried about having hurt his sister and apologizes. Dorothea becomes furious and demands that the prince concentrate and continue the fight. Ray is confused. He cannot continue fighting his sister like this. Noticing that he is retreating, Dorothea throws her sword and leaves the battlefield. Ray, excited, runs after her, closely followed by the event organizer. Not seeing the rope holding the tent, he trips over it. The structure begins to collapse, and beams are already falling on Dorothea's head, who stops and glares at Rai. In the next instant, everything happens too fast. The princess forcefully pushes the brother, who just arrived. Now she is lying on the ground, with her right hand pressed against the pavement by a wooden post. Eden and Theon, alarmed, run to help her. Dorothea, with her hand bandaged, faces Clara and Stefan, who reprimand her for her recklessness. She thinks that when both are in danger, it is more important to save the prince. But Clara and Stefan consider the princess the priority. Dorothea thanks her loyal servants for their words, moved by their concern. At that very moment, Raymond cries inconsolably, recognizing that his arrival turned into a catastrophe. As his sister had said, Theon, who approaches from behind, calls his friend, but he is crying so intensely that he doesn't hear him. The boy decides to leave the prince alone and heads to the hall of the Brant Palace, where everyone gathered to bandage Dorothy's broken arm. Not far away, next to a column, is Eden, with his head resting on his hands, and clearly pensive. Upon seeing Theon, he comments that he suspects Dorothy is uncomfortable with his presence, and suggests that he should leave. Theon analyzes Aiden's unpleasant gaze and expresses his displeasure at his excessive interest in the princess. The boy does not deny it and confesses that he likes Dorothy very much. Bront ironically comments that Theon must be familiar with that feeling, as he has his girlfriend Julia. Theon denies the rumors and affirms that he and Julia are just good friends. Dorothy thanks Duke Bront for the help he provided her during her treatment. Upon leaving the castle, she notices with satisfaction that next to Aiden is his brother George, who bows to her upon recognizing her as a princess. Aiden had so many things to say to Dorothy, but she left without even looking at him. The sun slowly sets on the horizon, and the imperial carriage takes the prince and the princess back to the castle. Raymond apologizes to his sister for having hurt her by saving him and begs her not to risk her life. Dorothy understands that Ray could never be a good emperor because he is too kind. And that must be corrected. Upon learning that her brother is willing to do anything for her, the princess asks him to act according to her orders from now on. Before sleeping, Clara informed Dorothea that Tia would leave soon. That's why the girl now lies in bed unable to fall asleep. She understands that they don't know when they will see each other again and jumps out of bed. She puts a handkerchief over her shoulders and goes out into the hallway, where she finds Tio, who has just packed his bags. Trying to contain the tremor in her voice, she explains that she came to say goodbye. Smiling, he promises that by the next time they meet, he will be ready to protect her. Not recognizing in him the Tio of the past, she promises to happily answer all his letters. The boy is happy. His smile doesn't fade when he says goodbye to the princess. However, he suddenly stops Dorothea, who is leaving, to make sure that he is only friends with Eden. Understanding that Eden's feelings for the princess are not reciprocated, Theo leaves the fortress calmly. Lying in bed, Dorothea wonders if what she experienced was a dream or reality, and without realizing it, she falls asleep. She dreamed of the past in which Eden whispered in her ear that she had the right to be empress. It was he who instilled in her that she was more worthy of occupying the throne, and that she would have no other opportunity if she didn't act. On the day of her father's funeral, she went to the prince whom the emperor ordered her to protect. Knowing that she would be judged anyway, she attacked her brother to kill his only loved one. He asked her to surrender, as it was obvious that he was stronger than her, but she did not stop, and stabbed him in the heart. She then decided that he was so stupid that even in that situation, he showed indecision. And then he cried, addressing her tenderly in the face of death. It seemed to Dorothy that at that moment he was smiling, having achieved the throne. But tears flowed from his eyes. The princess wakes up and replays the nightmare of memories over and over in her mind. She believes that in today's tournament, she simply surrendered to him without using all her strength in the duel. Suddenly, she realizes that perhaps in the past she also surrendered to her, sacrificing herself. Dorothy's thoughts are interrupted by the creak of a door opening, and someone enters the room. The princess sits up in bed and sees Raymond in the doorway, worried because he cannot sleep due to the pain in his hand. The boy approaches Dorothy's bed and promises to stay with her until she falls asleep. Raymond covers her with a blanket and tells her that he often misses his mother. Unlike him, Dorothy cannot miss her, as she blames herself for her death. Raymond gets angry with his sister for thinking that if she weren't here, he would live happily with both parents. He is happy to have such a sister and is sure that his mother would not regret having Dorothy, since it was not her fault. The princess listens to Ray and again thinks he is so foolish, but his words move her. The prince offers Dorothy to go with him to Lamsa's and, being rejected, asks her to allow him to return. Lying on her back to her brother, the princess promises him that she will consider his request. Hearing a snore behind him, she sits up and discovers that Ray is asleep with his head resting on the edge of her bed. She tries to wake him up, but instead of leaving, he collapses next to her on the pillow. And she covers him. Dorothea watches her brother, who has moved her feelings, and now sleeps beside her without reservations. It dawns and Clara enters Dorothea's room to wake her up. Upon crossing the door, she looks tenderly at the sleeping brother and sister together. Raymond attends to the princess's requests all morning, and she thinks he lacks dignity. Suddenly, an idea occurs to her, and she asks Ray to bring paper and ink to write for her. Since her hand hurts, Dorothea sits him down to write and dictates the genealogy of the Milaneo family, demanding that he write down everything she says. The princess lists one after another the names of all the emperors, determined to teach Raymond history. The sweaty prince, haunted by the feeling that he is not helping Dorothea to learn, but that he is educating himself, continues to write diligently. Suddenly, he stops and asks with emotion if she has received his letters, as she has never answered him. Assuming she was bored, Dorothea replies that she likes solitude. In reality, she doesn't like solitude, but she has always known that if no one loves her, she must get used to being alone. Ray asks the princess, with sadness in his voice, why she doesn't love him and promises to do everything possible to mend himself and win her loves. Dorothea is annoyed that Ray is so good and that only he can see the spirit of light. She is annoyed that he receives more than her. But what bothers her most is that, in her past life, she died by his hands. And she is the only one who remembers those painful memories. Recalling the two battles against Rai, the past and the current one, Dorothea asks her brother why he rejected victory. He assures her that he did not reject victory, nor did he intend to lose. He was just worried about her. Dorothea confesses that exactly what she doesn't like about him is that he is good and she is bad. Exhausted, the princess throws herself onto the bed and suggests that Rai resume practice tomorrow. Bending over her, the prince promises that in the next exams he will rank among the top 50 students in the school. Raymond plans to prove to his sister that he is not a fool and swears to her on his fingers that it will be so. Meanwhile, in the Bront mansion, Jonathan grabs Eden by the shirt and becomes furious because he didn't tell him that the girl who defended him in the square was a princess. Smiling, Eden apologizes, saying that while picking up the debris, his head was spinning. And he forgot to introduce Dorothea. Upon hearing the shouts and insults directed at Eden, Jonathan's mother defends the boy. Trapping him in a hug, she decides to cancel the party she had organized for her friends as punishment for Jonathan. With tears in his eyes, Eden begs his stepmother to allow him to visit the princess injured in the Bront family tournament. The woman praises Eden's good intentions and advises him to prepare a gift for the princess. Clara in the kitchen takes heart and prepares a soup herself for the injured princess. Tasting a little, she feels something is missing, so she looks among the people in the kitchen for someone who can help her. Upon seeing Stefan leaving the kitchen, she stops him and asks him to taste the broth. The knight praises the dish, and Clara, excited, hits his hand so hard that the broth spills over Stefan's shirt. The agitated maid promises to clean everything up and begins to vigorously rub the stain with a towel. Suddenly, Stefan pulls away, runs backward, moves in circles, and flees, leaving the maid surprised by his behavior in the kitchen. Dorothea is on the balcony, looks at the sea, and enjoys the beautiful weather, thinking that Eden promised to visit her. At that very moment, Eden arrives and apologizes to the princess for being late. He expresses concern that the injury will prevent her from practicing fencing. Noticing that the cool wind is coming from the sea, the boy takes off his jacket and puts it on Dorothea's shoulders. The princess perceives the scent of flowers that always surrounds Eden Bronite. He hands the girl a carefully wrapped gift tied with a gold ribbon, reminding her that she didn't accept his previous gift. Eden unwraps it and takes out a handkerchief with an embroidered sword. Dorothea thanks the boy, and, remembering that in her past life she had an identical one, asks him where he got it. It turns out that Eden commissioned it especially for the princess, who likes swords. Answering the gratitude, the boy, blushing, asks Dorothea to grant his request. It is about letting him sign on her cast, and the princess accepts. Entering the room and taking the pencil from the table, Eden writes on the bandages what he always wanted to tell Dorothea. He wrote that a beautiful pearl ripens thanks to old wounds and shines brighter when the night ends. Upon learning that Eden was sure she would let him sign from the beginning, Dorothea understands that she fell into his plans again. Smiling, the boy asks the princess for permission to visit her again soon. A month passes. Dorothea is in her room, reading a book and thinking about how now that Ray is gone. The castle has become peaceful again. Clara runs into the room and hands the princess a letter received from the imperial palace. From it, Dorothy learns that she must fulfill her obligations and receive someone from the royal family of Arca. The princess remembers that in her past life, upon ascending the throne, she killed Arca, but she cannot remember why she did it. At that very moment, a memory crosses her mind. The reason for her action was none other than Edinbronite. Nereus Arca had been promised Monica, whose family made the decision for the wedding for political reasons. However, at the debutante's ball, like many other girls, she fell in love with Edin, who simply enjoyed it. Monica announced to Nereus that she was breaking the promise, and that although she was not destined to be with Edin, she does not want to marry without love. Angry, Nereus decided that Edin was the cause of all his troubles, and upon seeing him anywhere, he humiliated and mocked him. However, Edin did not remain silent, and replied that Nereus failed to keep his beloved because of his own powerlessness. Immediately after accessing the throne, Nereus attacked the Imperia, and Dorothea, along with Edin, managed to stop him. Dorothea never liked Hark, but now everything must be different. So she decides to build a positive image of the Brinstay family. The princess wants the relationship between Edin and Nereus to be normal in this life, and not lead to a conflict between empires. Deciding not to delay, Dorothea orders Clara to prepare the carriage to head to the Bronst estate. While having tea with Edin, they discuss the imminent visit of the Hark delegation. The boy comments that he plans to receive them with her, and Dorothea chokes in surprise, since she believed that Edin would be hidden as an illegitimate son. The boy wishes to ask his parents to take him to the reception, as the Prince of Hark is the same age as him. Dorothea does not like the idea, as Nereus will not even take into account an illegitimate child who has not studied at the academy. The Duke of Bronst will regret having presented Edin to society, and the boy will suffer emotional injuries. Not knowing how to dissuade him, Dorothea will tell him that she consulted an astrologer, who warned her that Edin's aura of death would intensify if he crossed paths with representatives of Hark. Edin laughs shyly, as it turns out that the princess became interested in him in the astrologer's office. Dorothea understands that she was wrong to quickly mention that reason, but she didn't have time to find a better one. Edin looks at the princess with a smile and will try to find out what else the astrologer told him about him. He accepts her plea not to attend the meeting with Hark, but in return asks her to accompany him when she makes her debut in high society. Before her reincarnation, Dorothea had no partner. The position of companion was almost a punishment in the palace. Finally, Ray recommended his friend Theon as a companion, who could not refuse. It was then that Dorothea fell in love with him, which would end up being in misfortune for Theon. The princess was dragged by the memories of the moment when Karnan insisted on her engagement to build a bridge of relations with the Frid family. Edin repeats his question and asks Dorothea to promise to extend her hand on the day of her debut. Deciding that this was the best thing, the princess swore her promise on her fingers. A few days later, Nereus Pons from the Kingdom of Hark appears before Dorothea. The princess manages to cheer herself up despite the guest's arrogant look, since she plans to establish relations. Nereus remains silent and still, while the servants run to inform him that the princess is in front of him. However, the guest mocks her for not knowing how to handle spirits. In the Pons family, the power of the water spirit has been transmitted from generation to generation, with which they still maintain a close connection. Nereus does not agree to call her princess, someone who doesn't know how to deal with spirits and hasn't even managed to enter the academy. She informs him that she did not go to the academy by her own choice, not because she couldn't. With her diplomatic attitude, she proves to be much more prepared than Nereus, even though she doesn't study at the academy. They look at each other with growing hatred, without interrupting their verbose argument. With a cup of tea in hand, Dorothea lays out all her scientific knowledge to Nereus. To not be left behind, she remembers that military strategy is also taught at school. So, Dorothea suggests in a calm tone a sword duel and asks him to be respectful if she wins. Nereus was completely sure of his victory, but as soon as the fight started, Dorothea took the weapon from him. The princess mocks his skills, since it is the first time he has held a sword since removing the cast. But even so, he failed to defeat her. Enraged, Nereus summons the water spirit and causes the frightened servants to swirl in a whirlwind. Because of the water, the princess has difficulty breathing. She is afraid to think that her inability to summon spirits could soon lead Eubora to be absorbed by Hark. Regaining strength from her fury, Dorothea raises her sword and cuts the water with a strong blow. Nereus cannot believe what he sees, since the princess managed to resist the spirit with her own hands. Dorothea calms Clara and Stefan, who arrive running, assuring them that she is fine. And she gets up again. Walking confidently towards Nereus, she demands that he pick up the sword again to continue fighting. She justifies that the use of spiritual forces also counts as combat. But Dorothea does not oppose Nereus using them. She trusts herself and instantly disarms him again, putting her sword to his throat. While brushing her hair in her room, the princess reassures Clara, who is worried, saying she is fine. However, unpleasant thoughts invade her. She doesn't understand why she needed that victory, as if she had decided to step on others again. Eden enters the room with a restless expression, sure that he found out what happened. Dorothea assures him that everything is fine. Although she cannot stop thinking that, because of Eubor's water spirit, Arca will swallow her. Eden is worried, because the princess always says everything is fine, but her face shows that nothing is so. To entertain her, the boy plays the violin for Dorothea, and everyone is amazed by his talent. Suddenly, a knock on the door interrupts the music, and upon recognizing Nereus's voice, the princess jumps up. She grabs Eden by the hand, hides him behind the screen, and orders him not to move, as she had sworn not to see pawns. Without waiting for an invitation and pushing Clara, who was coming out to receive him, Nereus enters Dorothea's room unceremoniously. Seeing her, he notices she has no injuries, and the princess demands he quickly summarize the purpose of his visit. Nereus apologizes for having used his power on a common human who does not master spirits. And Dorothea, holding back her anger, accepts and asks him to leave. The unexpected guest hands the princess an invitation from her father for dinner, at which Duke Brant will also be present. Dorothea does not want to go, but refusing the king's invitation would be rude, so she orders Clara to prepare what is necessary. Nereus asks who is playing the violin before his arrival, but Dorothea claims she imagined it. And she hurries out. Pons glances at Stefan, who remains motionless next to the screen, and promises to catch up with them once he finishes his duties. While dining with the guests, King Arca tries to relax the atmosphere after the incident between his son and the princess. He hopes Dorothea will understand him and observes that she increasingly resembles Empress Elise. The princess saw a portrait of her mother, belonging to a branch of the Frids, and she liked the woman in it. Upon leaving the palace, Dorothea is indignant at the king's words, which insinuated that the princess is not called to the capital, even though she has already regained her health. Suddenly, she remembers the goods that Joy brought her every month and learns that there has been no news from him for 2 months. Just when she is thinking of him and worrying about something, he arrives flying towards the princess. Stefan pushes the cheeky boy who approaches Dorothea, but he doesn't give up and demands to speak with the princess. He kneels in front of her and asks for help, as he promised her he would help him if he ever had to sell his life. While traveling in the princess's carriage, Joy explains that his father owed money to the mayor, and that now he and his younger brother will be taken to the mine. Worried about the boy's life, the princess agrees to help the children, but demands they meet a condition. Dorothea visits the mayor and hands him a chest full of gold bars. The man claims that there is much more in the chest than the debt is worth. Dorothea asks him to use the money to cancel the debts of all the children working in the mine and stop using child labor. Before her rebirth, when she enacted a law to prohibit child labor, she was heavily criticized. Now she is not an empress, nor does she have the right to demand such a thing, but she hopes to have helped at least someone. Joyce is surprised to see that the princess plans to go with him to find his brother. Taking Stefan, they all leave together, as no one knows what might happen. Dorothea looks around in horror, observing the poor neighborhood where she had never been. People watch the newcomers with interest, as even simply dressed. The girl did not look like a beggar. The princess is surprised how they can live in a house made only of leaning planks. Upon opening the door, they see a frightened boy sitting on the floor, Joy's brother. Poe. Upon learning that they were leaving the house, the boy ran to hug his older brother excitedly. Joy informed his brother that they were leaving their father and ordered Poe to greet the princess. Dorothea smiled kindly at the thin boy, who looked at her with big green eyes. At that moment shouts were heard. Poe ran to take refuge with his older brother, and Dorothea turned towards the shouts. In the doorway was a disheveled, toothless man shouting at Stefan and demanding that the unwanted guests leave their home. Dorothea was furious with the man who intended to sell his children to a mine, and informed him that she was taking them with her. She grabbed Joy by the hand and quickly pulled them away from that scoundrel. Upon returning to the palace, Dorothea ordered the children to be bathed and dressed. The princess remembered the happy children she had bought and warned them that in exchange for paying his debt, they should work for her. She told them to follow her, as she had worked for them. They took the children to the banquet hall, where a table full of floral decorations was prepared. The children remained still, amazed by the magnificence they saw for the first time. And the princess ordered them to sit. Various dishes appear on the table, making the boys' eyes widen. Dorothea plans to teach them table etiquette so that Joy and Poe can serve her. Joy is a little scared. He doesn't know what to expect from the princess, as she might turn out to be just like Count Duncan, and force them to do heavy work. However, upon closely observing Dorothea's calm face, he decides she is good. With a smile, Joy tells the princess about his favorite dish, apple pie, and promises that one day he will give it to her as a token of gratitude. Returning to the study of protocol, the children eat everything on their plates and thank the princess. Suddenly, the door of the banquet hall opens and a servant enters with the dessert under a silver container. It turns out to be an apple pie that the princess asked to be brought to the children for their efforts in learning protocol. However, Joyce becomes sad. At the same time, he feels ashamed of Dorothea's kindness and disappointed that he was not the first to give her the pie. The princess reassures him and tells him that people who work for her must be clean and healthy. That is why their task now is to eat well and get stronger. Dorothea wrote all this in her letter to Theon. Upon reading it, he brightens up with a smile because of her kindness. He sits at the table and reaches for the ink to answer it as soon as possible. However, his hand does not obey. It trembles. His heart beats wildly, and his body stops obeying him. He is scared. He doesn't understand what is happening to him. Eden comes to visit the princess. Clara accompanies him, under the whispers of the maids moved by his beauty. Walking down the hallway, he hears Dorothea's voice, who is reprimanding someone for a cake hidden in the room. Upon opening the door, Eden sees Dorothea taking a moldy cake from the hands of two boys who do not want to discard it. Upon hearing from Clara where the children came from, Eden greets the princess and praises her act. Dorothea leaves the room and Joy and Poe are left alone with him, instantly recognizing him from the sword contest. The boys talk about Dorothea's kindness and mention that they are learning letters at the castle. And history. Eden shows his displeasure at how the children have attached themselves to the princess like parasites. Joy affirms that he is not one of those who stand around doing nothing. He just doesn't know exactly how to repay Dorothea. Eden kindly places his hand on his shoulder and shares his idea. Dorothea is in the guest room, having tea with Iden, when the embarrassed Joy appears. And Poe. They bring out a basket of berries from behind their backs that they picked to please the princess. The girl shyly accepts the gift, as she didn't force them to work, but she is glad they cared about her. Dorothea realizes that the basket is lined with Theon's handkerchief, completely stained with berry juice. The princess is furious and reprimands the boys for taking someone else's garment without permission, since that handkerchief means a lot to her. Terrified, Poe starts to cry and tells Dorothea that it was Eden's idea to bring her sweets. Joy is upset, as it was Eden who told him to line something under the berries. But the latter claims that he didn't think they would take anything from Dorothea. The princess asks the boys to step out for a moment, and as they move away, Joy throws a furious look at a smiling Eden. However, as soon as the door slams shut, Dorothea slaps Eden across the face. She looks him straight in the eyes and perfectly understands what really happened. Eden frowns in surprise, but Dorothea suddenly realizes that both are still the same as before. She intended to change Eden in the right direction, but she cannot even control herself. Before her rebirth, he had a habit of secretly dropping his belongings and enjoying the power when noble ladies knelt to pick them up. Some even kept his handkerchiefs, and he watched them laughing at them. Dorothea was the first to find out about this habit, and this marked the beginning of their shared sin. Their hatred was too intertwined. The crowned tyrant and her right-hand man who pushed her towards it, all that took root then, and finally bore fruit, leading to Raymond's murder. She tried to convince her friend Theon, who was crying next to the corpse, that she was now empress. She assured him that soon he would sit next to the empress on the throne. However, the people resisted a man without spirit, who killed his loved ones occupying the throne. She killed everyone who opposed her, but Theon, contrary to her expectations, accused her of madness. Since Raymond's murder, insomnia plagued her every night, fearing that they hated her. However, Eden, always by her side, repeated that the people were trapped in prejudices. Theo distanced himself from Dorothea, but Eden swore to always be by her side and take care of her. Theo kept writing to Julia, and his face always lit up with a smile upon receiving a new letter. Dorothea trembled with anger, as she had much more than Julia, but Theo hadn't even smiled at her once. She even decided to build a new palace for Theo to win his affection. However, it didn't work. Dorothea discovered that Theo considered her miserable and repulsive. Then, convinced that only her jewels were beautiful, she ripped the hoop out with a jerk, tearing her ear. Eden arrived and upon seeing the bleeding ear, rushed to help Dorothea. At that moment, they announced that Theo wished to see the Empress, and she turned hopefully that he would finally come with love. However, Theo was furious, as he had learned that Dorothea had annulled the title of Levin's family and forbade them from appearing in the capital. Dorothea begged her husband to stop being interested in Julia, while Eden silently observed the scene. Upon hearing Theo furiously describing how much Julia meant to him, Dorothea slapped him. She stated that she had never sworn to belong to him, and Theo turned around and left, while Dorothea ran after him. However, Eden stopped her, convinced that she would only hurt her husband's feelings, and warned her that she had to wait a little. Hugging her, he promised that someday, everything she longed for so much would come into her arms. The Empress gave Theo everything she owned, but the more she gave, the more indifferent he became. Once, while Dorothea was reflecting again on how to win over Theon, Eden came to her. He came to inform her that Julia had died. She had an accident while wandering alone without an escort. Dorothea thought that perhaps Eden had killed Julia because of her. But she was indifferent. She was already running towards Xian, as now there were no obstacles between them. The Empress found her husband in the garden, with his head bowed and holding a dead bird. With tears in his eyes, he turned to Dorothea and asked if she still loved him anyway. Kneeling in front of her husband, Dorothea replied that she still loved him. Dorothea, with tears in her eyes, convinced Theon that she had nothing to do with Julia's death. Grabbing the Empress's hands, Theon told her that his ambition had destroyed him. Some time later, he took his own life and his shadow began to haunt Dorothea, who could not perform her duties well. In the end, the Empress who had plunged the country into chaos and caused the death of many people was sentenced to death. Before the execution, Eden approached Dorothea to ask for her last words. Kneeling in front of her on one knee, he wished that she would ask him for her salvation. However, Dorothea refused, as her life without Theon no longer made sense. Eden was furious. He could not understand what Theon had that, even in the face of death, the Empress could not forget him. Dorothea only smiled and asked Eden to become a hero, as until now she had only played the role of the villain. Eden looked at her silently, extracted a crystal from his cane, and offered it to the Empress. But she turned away. A moment later, an axe flashed over Dorothea's head, and the Empress was beheaded. She died thinking that no one in the world had loved her, and if she had known it would end like this, she would have ended it sooner. Now Dorothea stands, clenching her fist tightly, trembling, and not understanding why all those memories visit her right now. However, she knows one thing for sure. She and Eden are very similar. That's why they can only hurt each other more. By being close to Eden, Dorothea fears surrendering again to the desire for power and following the path of evil. Eden apologizes for his mistake and hugs the princess tightly, preventing her from leaving. He asks her to stop crying, but his eyes also shed tears. Dorothea pushes him away. She believes that apologies are just another mask, as in her previous life he never apologized. Eden feels remorse for what he did, as he did it out of jealousy, wanting to be the princess's only friend. He fears that if Dorothea makes friends with others, he will be left alone. But the princess does not know how much she can believe his words. The emperor is informed about the successful visit of the Hark delegation to Sarati, and about how the princess impressed everyone. The report also mentions Dorothea's achievements in fighting the infection, charitable donations, and the development of her mind. The emperor discovers that the princess has already regained sufficient health and even participated in a fencing competition. Karnan orders Dorothea to return to the palace and decides to send her to the admission exams for the epistemology. He believes that the exam will reveal if the princess is truly as intelligent as everyone says. Stefan sits in the garden, sharpens his sword, and thinks about the years spent in Narration with the princess. He remembers his first meeting with Dorothea, when he discovered with other knights that she was in the desert. Upon meeting the princess again in the palace, she did not recognize him. But he clearly remembered how her slender hands clung to him in the desert. That's why, upon meeting her officially, he didn't dare shake her hand, fearing that her small, fragile hands would break when doing so. When the princess first asked him to teach her swordsmanship, Stefan was happy, because he was no longer practicing alone. Furthermore, upon seeing how quickly the princess learned, the knight discovered what the joy of teaching was. Stefan considered Dorothea an intelligent, hardworking, and strong girl, as if blessed by a god. Impossible not to love. However, one day the princess told him about her nightmares, and Stefan understood that this girl's destiny could never be worthy of love, since she was born killing her mother. Empress Alice died from hemorrhage during Dorothy's birth. The doctor barely saved the blood-covered baby, but they say that in the end, his head was cut off. Stefan does not understand who told Dorothy all this, as she did not need to know it. And now she suffers from guilt. The knight laments not being as kind and open as Clara, and finds it difficult to say words of support to the princess. Suddenly, a crackling in the bushes draws attention. Stefan gets up and sees Joy, who falls down scared. The boy sits next to him and asks him how he became a knight. Joy also wants to become a knight, but believes he won't be able to, as he does not belong to a noble family. Stefan sadly listens to the boy, thinking about something personal, and asks him if he really wants to become a knight. Joy enthusiastically convinces Stefan of his desire, as he believes that dying fighting an enemy is better than dying working in a mine. Furthermore, the boy thinks that if he becomes a knight, he could thank the princess, since she saved him. And so, Stefan now tells Dorothy about his desire to train Joy and asks for permission. Upon obtaining consent, Stefan asks the princess if she will continue practicing fencing. However, Dorothy believes it is dangerous for her to become stronger, as holding a sword, she feels invaded by the desire to win and conquer. Clenching her fists, and without looking Stefan in the eyes, she refuses to continue training under the pretext that she is no longer interested. The knight watches her with a sad look, while the girl quickly leaves the room. The chef scolds Poe for wandering around the kitchen, as if the boy is hungry, he should just ask. However, Po is not hungry. He wants something else, but he is too shy to ask. The chef leans towards the boy to whisper his idea in his ear. The chef praises the happy Po for what he said and promises to help him as much as necessary. Eden lies in his room on the bed and cries, distressed by the princess's anger and her refusal to receive him. He wants to do something that can make Dorothy happy, and suddenly, a brilliant idea occurs to him. In Narration, there are flowers that glow at night. Other places do not have them, and many people come to look for them. Eden decides to go look for flowers. It is already getting dark, and he regrets not having taken a servant. However, he rejects these thoughts, as he must do it only with his own efforts so that the princess will be happy only for him. And finally, Eden finds the flower. It grows on a steep and rocky cliff of the mountain. He holds Tian's handkerchief in his hand. Dorothy thinks that, despite Eden's apologies, she still doesn't want to see him. A knock sounds at the door, and Clara appears in the doorway with the Bront family maid. Who is looking for the boy? Dorothy discovers that he left to look for a flower for her and has not returned yet. Eden, clinging to the sharp rocks, climbs up the steep rock and almost reaches. With a final effort, he grabs the stems and plucks the flowers, looking at them with an intoxicated gaze. Suddenly, the sole of his boot slips, and before he realizes it, Eden falls down the rock. Dorothy, worried, accompanied by Stefan, heads to the forest to look for Eden, shouting his name incessantly. There is complete darkness around them, and suddenly, the princess sees a distant glow behind the bushes. Approaching and pushing aside the bushes, she sees Eden sitting on the ground, wiping his tears with one hand and holding flowers with the other. Upon seeing Dorothy, he turns away, as he does not want to show himself to her dirty and unkempt. The princess wipes Eden's face with her sleeve. She understands that, due to the past, she has not looked at him in the present. She is completely indifferent to how he looks now, since he went to look for the flower for her, risking his life. Dorothea intertwines a flower in her hair and realizes that what really matters is the beauty of Eden's soul, not his appearance. She places the second button behind the boy's ear and cheerfully thanks him for his gift. In the last few days, Joy and Po had been avoiding Dorothy. As soon as they met each other's eyes, they shuddered and fled. A knock sounds on the princess's room door. In the doorway appear Joy and Po, holding a plate with a slice of apple pie. As an apology for their behavior, Joy, as promised, offers the princess the pie that the cook prepared helping the brothers. Dorothy is delighted with the pie, as never before has any food brought her as much joy as this one. Prepared thinking of her. The princess thanks the boys, who jump for joy at having managed to please her. But at that moment, someone enters. Turning around, Dorothea sees the imperial knight, who has arrived to deliver an order from Karnan. The princess is notified that she must return to the capital, as her health has now recovered. Out of anger, Dorothy even drops the pie, since everyone she cares about is in Narration. The princess communicates to the emperor that she will stay in the palace until Joy and Po prepare a new pie for her. Raymond runs silently after Theon, who is walking down the hallway, and happily bumps into him. Surprised, the boy pushes him hard, not immediately recognizing him as his friend. Ray notices that Theon's hands are shaking badly. He worries about his condition, as he didn't even attend the history class. Julia appears in the hallway, calls Theon, and they both leave to talk privately. Ray notices that something is wrong with his friend, although he hopes it is not serious and that Theon will tell him soon. Having a cup of tea, Julia observes that Theon seems especially tired today. She tells him that, upon going out for a walk at dawn, her vision suddenly blurred, and the bird he was watching died. Clutching his hair, he realizes his guilt and that he unintentionally killed the bird. Theon clutches his hair again. A shiver runs down his body. Julia throws herself towards him. She apologizes, calms down, and confesses her worries to Julia, not understanding where so much strength came from. Since a certain moment, strange symptoms began to appear. At first, it was just a hesitant spark in the darkness. But over time, that dark spirit force grew and began to kill insects first. And now a small bird. In the fried family, which has a contract with dark spirits, there hasn't been anyone with such strength for almost 100 years. And now, sensing its awakening, Theon is afraid of hurting someone. Julia reassures him, because generations have passed, and the blood of the Friths is very diluted. So Theon will not be strong enough to cause harm. Julia advises him to tell Ray too, as he can handle the spirit of light. And maybe he can help Theon. But he already asked Ray about the strength, and he knew that the prince has always been in contact with the spirit. Whereas in Theon it is different. The spirit appears. It does what it wants and disappears. Furthermore, to control the spirit, a high degree of connection with it is needed. Something Theon does not have. The boy remembers that the strength was instilled in him when he was about to write a letter to Dorothy. He hopes to learn to control it before seeing the princess again. Clara informs Dorothea about the letter received with an invitation to a gathering in Countess Duncan's hall. The princess also discovers that this time someone will make their debut in high society. During dinner, Duke Bronete reflects on the interest Princess Dorothea shows in his illegitimate son. He knows that the princess refused visits with other young nobles her age, but often spends time with Edin. The Duke considers it a good opportunity that between his son of unfavorable origin and the princess there is a scandal. He orders the maid to urgently call the Duchess to discuss his ideas with her, since an illegitimate son and a father's unwanted princess could make a perfect couple. Without waiting for the Duchess to arrive, the irritated Duke goes to his room himself. Upon learning that her husband plans to present Edin in society due to Princess Dorothea's interest, the Duchess becomes enraged. She is ashamed that the Duke decided to reveal to the world that he had an affair with a barmaid. He fathered a son with her and now raises him. She assures him that she always treated the boy as her legitimate son too, and letting him be taken away was her only moral commitment. She is not willing to do more. Bronete thinks that Edin is old enough to know the world and supposes that the Duchess fears for Jonathan's position. The Duchess believes she would feel ashamed, looking people in the face, if she presented the son conceived by her husband with another woman to society. She tells her husband that she thinks Edin is very adorable, but she will never be able to love him. At that moment, the sound of a glass crashing to the floor from Edin's hands is heard, who accidentally became a witness to the scandal. The boy stops for a moment, but then runs at full speed out of the room, ignoring his father's shout. Upon entering his son's room, the Duke finds him crying. The boy is upset because his parents are ashamed of him. Bronete tries to convince Edin, who doesn't understand why they hide him and why they argue because of him. He thinks it's all his fault for disappointing his parents and not getting into the School of Sages. He begged the Duchess so much to take him to the exam that she gave in, but an accident on the way prevented them from arriving. Edin does not feel guilty about his mother's low lineage. That's why he doesn't understand why they argue about him. The Duke assures the boy that it is not his fault and promises to officially introduce him as his son at Countess Duncan's reception. The boy knows that his father and the Duchess truly love him, and the man understands that he had not paid enough attention to this mature child before his time. Princess Dorothea enters the Countess's house, and everyone immediately overwhelms her with compliments, to the point that she already regrets having come. Suddenly, Duke Bronete approaches and distracts her from the chattering ladies to greet her and express his respect. Behind him appears Edin, surprising the princess with his presence. She is surprised, since before her reincarnation, Edin only appeared in high society after Jonathan, who died marrying. Dorothea does not understand Duke Bronete's sudden emotional changes, since until then they had always hidden it. The princess is happy about Edin's debut and sincerely congratulates him on his first appearance in society. The boy felt relieved to find Dorothea here, because he had been worried about not knowing how to behave among strangers. The princess is sure that Edin will adapt quickly, but his father calls the boy at the start of the event. Edin kisses the princess's hand and apologizes to her for having to leave her. In the middle of the crowd, Dorothea hears the ladies murmuring, condemning the Duke, and admiring Mrs. Bronite's generosity. But Dorothea knows that soon everyone will go crazy trying to get close to her, because in her other life, her influence in high society was enormous. So much so that depending on whether Eden attended the ball or not, the number of guests changed. And that became his power. Countess Duncan learns about the musician's injury, who will not be able to perform, and fears that no one can replace him. Overhearing the conversation by chance, Eden offers himself as a candidate for pianist. The boy apologizes for the interruption and introduces himself as the younger son of the Bronite family. The Countess laughs and asks Eden if he can play Beethoven, as it is difficult for a mere mortal. Eden assures that he reviewed this composition every day and asks Mrs. Duncan to give him a chance. Dorothea drinks juice indifferently and wonders where Eden might have gone. Suddenly, the murmur of the crowd dies down, and turning around, the princess sees Eden sitting at the piano. The song hypnotizes her. It seems to her that Eden is playing like that only for her to listen. Dorothea thinks that, if Eden hadn't been a minister but a musician, he would be happier. But he was very ambitious. The attendees applaud the young talent, and upon finding the princess in the crowd, he signals to her enthusiastically. Dorothea goes out to the balcony for a moment of peace, but overhears ladies gossiping about how Eden greeted the princess. She gets angry seeing that people interfere in what doesn't concern them, saying that she and he make the perfect couple. And right at that moment, Eden approaches her. Dorothy is convinced that his words are not good for anything, because their perfect union is precisely because she is an abandoned Milaneo and an illegitimate Bronite, two natural geniuses who cannot shine brightly. Now the ladies murmur that the princess cannot summon a spirit and announce the fall of the imperial palace. Suddenly, from somewhere on the balcony, a juicy and sweet red sauce spills onto one of the ladies. Looking up, they see Eden Bronite apologizing for accidentally spilling the glass while trying to place it on the railing. Eden claims that the Frids have not been able to summon the spirit of darkness for over 100 years. But they still maintain their strength, which means that if someone from Milaneo cannot summon spirits, that will not bring down the empire. Clenching her fists, Dorothea asks Eden to stop, as she believes that a Milaneo who cannot see spirits is not truly Milaneo. The ladies bow and excuse themselves that they only feel sorry for the princess, as they abandoned her in Narration, and have not called her to the palace for years. The princess leaves, assuring the ladies that they do not have to feel sorry for her, because she is so unhappy that someone must feel pain for her. Eden throws the glass on the ground, a few steps away from the high society gossips, and leaves after the princess. Dorothea wants to return to where the people who care about her are Stefan, Clara, Joy, and Poe. However, her path is blocked by a knight who appears out of nowhere, announcing the arrival of the imperial carriage. He reads Carnon's decree, which states that the princess has recovered her health, and therefore must return. Dorothy understands that if she refuses, she will again be considered a rebel. That's why she asks for at least time to prepare herself. A knight must obey an order without delay. However, Dorothea asks him to at least let her say goodbye. The princess understands that everyone she holds dear, except Clara, will stay in Narration, and she worries about Joy and Poe. Dorothea asks to be given a couple of minutes to write letters to Clara and the boys. Eden enters the room and offers to personally deliver the letter to the princess at the castle. The boy asks Dorothea not to worry, as he will fulfill to the maximum any task she gives him. The princess thinks that this time Eden will not misbehave again and asks him to deliver the letter to Clara. Eden congratulates the princess on her return to Yampas and asks her not to say goodbye as if it were the last time. Approaching and smiling, Dorothea promises that they will meet again. Eden reminds her of the debutante's ball where he will be her partner, and until then he promises to wait only for that day. Without letting Dorothea leave, Eden draws her close. He hugs her tightly and kisses her on the forehead in farewell. Raymond is worried because Theon is hiding something from him. He thinks his friend has fallen in love with Julia and they have left him alone. With these thoughts, he walks down the hallway, and suddenly from an open door, he hears the sound of broken glass. Ray opens the door and sees Theon sitting on the floor. He trembles and looks very dejected. The prince runs to his friend, and the latter begs him to help him learn to control his soul as he wishes. Dorothea has returned to the castle for the first time in 3 years. However, nothing has changed. Neither the castle nor Karnan. The emperor believes it is time for the girl to return to the castle, but Dorothea sees no reason to be there. Karnan promises to change his opinion of his daughter if she passes the entrance exams for the epistemology. Before, Dorothea would have been happy with these words and would have studied diligently. But now she sees no point in it and refuses. The enraged emperor didn't even intend to give Dorothea a choice. He orders her to pass the exams. The princess agrees to take the exam, but refuses to accept the professor chosen by the emperor. Lying in her room, Dorothea reflects on how important it was for her to memorize all the exam topics before, and how it is still relevant now. Raymond enters the room bored and throws himself towards his sister, whom he pushes away as always. The prince hands Dorothea a bouquet of flowers as a welcome gift. Ray is enthusiastic that his sister is entering the epistemology. He imagines that he will travel there with her and introduce her friends. Dorothea again reprimands her brother for coming to chat with her about nonsense instead of studying. Clara is horrified by the princess's sudden call to the capital. She clutches her head and runs all over the house collecting her things. Upon learning that Dorothea is leaving, Joy and Poe become sad, as now they will have to return home with their father. Burying his face in his older brother's chest, Poe cries because he doesn't want to return. Eden surprises them in the midst of the agitation, as he arrived to fulfill the princess's commission. He hands a letter to Clara, who upon reading it is surprised by the princess's initiative and kindness. The boys find out that Dorothea also ordered them to go to Lampus along with Clara. Eden clenches his hands with envy. He says goodbye and rejects Clara's proposal to stay for sweets. The boy leaves, but Joy and Poe catch up with him in the hallway. They thank him for the letter and apologize for getting angry with him. Eden comments on the boys' luck and orders them not to dishonor the princess. And he walks away. A month later, Dorothea is in Karnan's office, among exam papers scattered on the floor. The emperor is furious because the princess scored 0 points, a grade that no one had ever had in the entire history of epistemology. Dorothea assures her father that she did her best, as she set a record that had never existed before. She reproaches the emperor that his wife's death was more important to him than his daughter's birth, and that in his whole life she has not received a single gift from him. Carnot cannot stand the princess's assumptions that he would have preferred his daughter to die rather than his wife. And he shouts at her. Dorothea asks the emperor if he wanted her to die when she was kidnapped several years ago, and receives a harsh slap for that question. The princess accuses him of never having hugged her because he does not consider her his own daughter. She asks him not to call her Princess Milaneo from now on, as that name brings her no blessing. Before saying goodbye, Dorothea also asks not to be called to events or ceremonies. The girl leaves the room, happy that it happened this way, as now even the little affection her father had for her has disappeared. Estefan runs up to Dorothea, who looks with horror at the redness on her cheek. But she assures him that everything is fine. However, the next moment, the girl sheds bitter tears. She no longer wants to stay in the capital and wishes to return to the castle by the sea. Stefano hugs and squeezes Dorothea tightly, who, crying, wants to disappear from the world. Now she is crying inconsolably on his shoulder, begging him to take her far away from there. With eyes swollen from tears and the mark of the slap, the princess, smiling, thanks Estefano for having been by her side. The knight smiles and strokes her head, and her soul already feels much calmer. On the way, they run into Theon, who calls the princess and starts a conversation with her. Dorothea feels uncomfortable because she is once again showing herself to Theon in a way she does not wish. After hearing Dorothy's words assuring him that she is fine, he pulls a tube of medicine from his pocket. and advises her to apply it to her cheek. The princess takes the medicine, thanks Theon for helping her, and after saying goodbye, she walks away. As he watches her leave, the boy wonders who could have hit Dorothea. And worried about her, he decides to ask. However, the dark force appears again, and Theon's whole body trembles, deciding to be careful in his encounters with people. Dorothea looks at the medicine Theon gave her, but for some reason she thinks of Eden. She decides to write him a letter and tell him what happened, as Eden always listened to her attentively, like a very close friend. Dorothea takes the oak box in her hands and admires its contents. She decides to include in the letter a bookmark made with a flower Eden gave her. To cheer him up, the princess thinks of writing about her desperately lonely existence in the palace, or perhaps about how her only parent desires her death. Considering it useless, she changes her mind and slams the box shut. Adam sits in the garden with his legs crossed, dejected by the lack of news from the princess. He envies the boys who went to Lamsar to see her, as he misses Dorothea so much that it already hurts. Recalling the princess's words, Karnan reflects that he never wished for her death. Why? What father wants his daughter to die at the hands of kidnappers? But deep down, if he could save Alice the day Dorothea was born, offering his life, he would do it without hesitation. Every time Karnan looks at his daughter, he remembers how his wife passed away in his arms. And he cannot show tenderness. He thinks about how terrifyingly similar Dorothea is to her mother, and that perhaps he could feel something for her. But the girl cannot summon spirits, and that endangers the imperial family. The emperor is sad because the child Alice gave birth to with her life cannot summon even a single spirit. Raymond is very affected upon learning that Dorothea failed the academy exam. He tells Theon that she got the worst grade, 0 points on the exam. The boy is convinced that the princess failed the exam not due to clumsiness, but quite the opposite. Because of her great intelligence, she did it on purpose. Theon tells his friend that he manages to control his strength, and now he fears hurting someone less. But Raymond worries that if Theon keeps suppressing the dark spirit, it could end up harming him. The dark spirit is linked to death, and the more Theon suppresses it, the less life force he will have. Raymond found old books in the Imperial Library and studied some facts. He shows Theon the story about how the first Milan and the first Frey signed a blood pact with the Spirit King. Milan created the sun by formulating the wish of the Spirit of Light, while Frey signed the Spirit of Darkness, casting a veil to protect themselves from the sun. Upon discovering that light and darkness were one, and the families balanced each other mutually, Rey offers help to Theon. The prince promises to find out how to stabilize his forces so that the Spirit of Light overcomes the Spirit of Darkness. Clara, loaded with boxes and things, rushes to meet the princess, as the move took longer than she expected, not noticing Stefan in her path. The maid crashes into him. The boxes fall, and she ends up in the knight's arms. Dorothea appears to receive them, depressed for not having prepared for their arrival. Clara hugs the princess, notices a mark on her cheek, and offers to apply the remedy as soon as possible. Joy and Poe are also worried about Dorothea's appearance and simultaneously interested in what happened to her. The girl understands that it wasn't returning to Narration, but the people who care about her. She greets them happily, as her home is now where those people are. Everyone, including Stefan, runs to hug the princess. She is glad to be surrounded by loved ones again. Sitting with a cup of tea, Dorothea reflects on how good it is that they have arrived, since she feels uncomfortable near Karnan. Joy and Poe approach her to ask how they can help, and Dorothea orders them to live as before, but without going to other palaces and dedicating themselves more to protocol. Theon and Raymond enter the room. The latter comes to support his sister because he is worried about her mood lately. Theon compliments Dorothea, and she realizes that, thanks to his kindness, the memories of her death gradually fade. Raymond notices the boys standing aside and asks his sister who they are. The boys feel nervous about speaking to the prince, but Rey speaks to them simply. Something unusual for a monarch. Dorothea realizes that perhaps it is not so bad, since she has always envied his radiance and the way everyone loves him. Dorothea is 16 years old. She walks in the garden and suddenly hears Clara calling her. The maid arrives panting and approaches the princess to inform her and ask for a few days' leave. It turns out that Clara's father, ill for years, passed away this morning. Dorothea expresses her condolences to the maid and regrets not having known sooner. To give her more time with her sick father. Clara is moved by her mistress's understanding and kindness, but Dorothy does not see it that way, since she knows nothing about her maid's life. The princess orders someone to be sent to help Clara with the funeral arrangements, and a bouquet in Dorothy's name. She discovers that sending a bouquet in the name of the imperial family is only for distinguished ministers. Dorothy orders the bouquet to be sent anyway and plans to personally appear at the funeral to stand by Clara's side. Who took care of her all these years? Dorothea is not afraid of the idea of going out on the street where commoners live, as she cannot leave someone important to her alone in a difficult moment. Clara thinks about how much she needs to prepare for tomorrow's funeral. An unexpected knock on the door interrupts her. Surprised because she is not expecting anyone, Clara opens the door and sees Stefan in the threshold. Who has come to help her? Those gathered in the funeral hall murmur about the bouquet, sent in the name of the imperial family. Clara is in the hall and thanks Stefan for the help, as thanks to the princess, the funeral preparations were simple. She learns from the knight that he offered to help her himself, as he was worried about her upon hearing her cry. An imperial carriage approaches the funeral hall and the princess appears, dressed in mourning attire. Dorothea apologizes for being late, but Clara is so moved that she doesn't know how to thank the princess. She hugs her tightly and promises that she will live with her for the rest of her life. After the funeral, the delegation went to Clara's house for tea. Dorothea discovers that her maid has an older brother, but he is not in a condition to receive visitors. At that moment, the door to the adjacent room opens and in the threshold, in a wheelchair, Clara's brother Anton appears. He introduces himself and apologizes to the princess for the inconvenience caused. Anton thanks Dorothea for her condolences and for the care she provides to his sister. The princess affirms that she considers Clara part of her family, as family are not just people united by blood, but something more valuable. Clara, blushing, leaves the room to prepare a new cup of tea. Anton thanks the princess for loving his sister with all her heart and seeing her true character. He talks about his illness, which prevents him from working as he knows how to sew. But people don't buy clothes made by lame people. Upon learning of Anton's sewing skill, Dorothea gets an idea how to help him. Meanwhile, Clara sits sadly and blushing in the courtyard, hugging her knees. Stefan approaches her to confirm if everything is all right. It turns out that Clara didn't want to introduce her brother to Stefan and the princess because everyone had scorned him until now. Clara is ashamed. She feels she has deceived Dorothea, as she does not consider herself good. With tears in her eyes, she recounts how tired she is of her sick father and brother. And she did not want to return home from the castle. Stefan silently hugs her and squeezes her tightly to comfort her. He understands that it was difficult for her to bear this burden alone, and he has nothing against her. The knight talks about Clara's kindness, which the princess perceived, and it is easier for the young woman in his arms. Saying goodbye to the maid, Dorothea asks her to turn to Stefan if she needs help. The princess informs that she will be busy for a while, because now she has an important matter. Sitting in her office, Dorothea works hard on a plan to create a support center for people with disabilities. Dorothea dreams of creating a program to provide means for treatment and regular medical assistance. Dorothea also wants to form a community where people with similar problems can communicate. But she needs the emperor's permission. The princess remembers how she planned to create this center even before her rebirth. But the nobility reacted negatively to the idea. People from high circles believed that investment should be made in something that yields benefits to the palace. Karnan called the princess's idea a waste of time. He affirmed that the untalented bring nothing useful. Dorothea did not understand how they could treat others badly, just because they offered no benefit. So she thinks that if she had power, no one would dare look at her with disdain. These reflections frighten Dorothea, as she had promised not to desire much, and yet she continues to do so. Saddened by the fact that nothing has changed and feeling desperate, the girl gets up from the table. Ray enters and, upon seeing Dorothea's papers, asks permission to review her plan. Upon reading his sister's project, the prince gets excited and wants to analyze it to start it. Dorothea believes that she probably won't achieve anything, as she needs the emperor's permission. Raymond offers his help and promises to talk to his father, as it is difficult for Dorothea to do so. The princess thinks the emperor might listen to Ray and wants to try for Clara's sake. And Anton. Raymond promises to talk to the emperor, as he is willing to fulfill any wish of his sister. However, he has a condition in return. Dorothea must thank him and hug him. The princess refuses, but Ray does not give up. He doesn't understand why Dorothea cannot even hug him once. Raymond throws himself on the floor face down. It hurts him that his sister has never done it and has not loved him since he was a baby. Dorothea remembers how, after being reborn, she got annoyed when her brother held her. She doesn't understand why those hugs are so important to Ray and what they mean to him. She believes it is an agreement to take another step towards a relationship where they understand each other a little more. By proposing that he fulfill another wish of his brother, Ray asks him to kiss him on the cheek. Dorothea accepts, but promises to do it only after the prince gets permission from the emperor. Hoping that the princess's heart will open a little more to him, Ray heads to the father's office. On the way, he stops in front of his mother's portrait, and the first memory arises in his mind. The deceased mother in the coffin and the father looking at her. Instead of the mother, his younger sister, the special Dorothea Milaneo, came into this world. Raymond hugged her, fearing to lose someone else, and swore to always protect his little sister. Looking at his mother's portrait, the prince promises to take care of Dorothea and do everything possible for her. Upon reviewing the documents, the emperor wonders why Raymond decided to spend the imperial budget on something as insignificant as helping disabled people. He considers that expense an unnecessary luxury, but Ray affirms that it is very important. The emperor demands that the prince not be influenced by trivialities and always act in his own self-interest. Since the most important thing is the splendor of the empire, Ray affirms that the splendor of the people is the splendor of the empire. Without a people, there is no reason for the emperor's presence. Upon hearing Dorothea's name involved in this plan, Karnan becomes furious. He does not consider the girl part of the Milaneo family and thinks she is against him. Raymond disagrees with his father, as she is not like that. He accuses the emperor of not caring at all about his daughter. Karnan remained silent, but with his expression, he lets Ray know that he will not base his decision on the girl's opinion. The emperor affirms that the Milaneo lineage is more important than it seems, and that it is not worth shining before people for a while only to disappear later. Since you cannot always shine for everyone, Rai thinks the emperor does not understand that Dorothy is trying to create a world where everyone has equal rights and help each other. The prince insists that he came to the emperor precisely because the Milaneo name has power. He assures that Dorothea developed this plan because she knows the family possesses power, wealth, and strength that can help people. Raymond does not understand what the purpose of the Milaneo family is if they only seek power. But his father warns him about a critical situation in the family. The emperor is dissatisfied with Dorothea's inability to summon spirits, since this could lead to the collapse of the Milaneos. Ray doesn't like that his father sees the princess as useless and doesn't understand why he hates her so much. Karnan reminds his son that the Frid family lost the ability to communicate with spirits. That is why authority is in the hands of the Milaneos. However, due to Dorothea's deficiencies, imperial power is in danger. So the emperor advises Rai to worry about those without imperfections. The prince does not understand how human hearts can be weighed on a scale when everyone is a citizen of Uberia. Having settled the matter with his son, the emperor turns around and leaves the room. Raymond is sad because he will not be able to help the people, since the emperor only trusts the power of spirits. The prince goes to Dorothy, without knowing how to tell her about the emperor's rejection. He relays the bad news, but insists that the princess continue with her plan. He promises to take responsibility for the decision, but Dorothy considers him reckless. Ray suggests pretending he gave a false permission from the emperor on his own accord. He also offers her his money, knowing that she does not have enough to carry out the plan. He jokes that they won't kick him out, as he is the only heir apparent. But he immediately regrets his words. Dorothy grabs him by the shirt collar and shakes him hard, not understanding why her brother is desperately trying to help her. Taking his hands, the prince affirms that he simply likes to fulfill his sister's wishes. He wants her to unleash her talents and abilities, which is why he helps her. Dorothy cannot comprehend why Raymond loves her so much, when she has every reason to hate him. She confesses her sin of always hating him out of envy. Dorothy wants the prince to ignore her, like Kernan and other aristocrats. Ray apologizes to his sister with a smile on his face, because he cannot hate her. He feels happiness, since Dorothy considers herself evil just for being envious, which reveals her goodness. Ray believes that truly evil people feel no guilt, no matter what happens. And they never regret it. He is sure that Dorothea is not like that and hugs her tightly, although she still has difficulty believing that she is good. However, at a certain moment, her heart melts and she clings to her brother, apologizing and soaking his shoulder with bitter tears. Raymond is doing well, and Theon and Guglia, noticing it, become interested in what happened to the prince. He tells them about his feelings for his sister and about the support center they are creating together. Upon hearing the friends' conversation, Nereus Pons jokes about the idea of creating a help center for the disabled. He calls it madness, but Raymond, as always, does not take his words seriously. Pons opines that money should be invested judiciously and is sure that the emperor will not allow such nonsense. Pons considers that the prince should have been expelled from the episteme long ago, since he doesn't approve well and wastes time on useless ideas. Without losing his dignity, Ray thanks Nereus for worrying about other people's problems and suggests he mind his own business. Pons recalls that the imperial family is in decline, and Theon defends his friends. Nereus is reminded that he lost against the same princess who has no connection to spirits. Raymond, without stopping smiling, advises Pons to take care of his own affairs and those of the Kingdom of Hark. Leaving Nereus alone with his thoughts, Ray, Tian, and Julia leave the room. Dorothea talks to Ray about the need to change the people's perception and end discrimination against disabled people. While thinking about how to improve the image of those with limitations, an idea occurs to Rai. 1 year later, the support center that Raymond and Dorothea dedicated so much effort to is finally created. Despite the difficulties they had, by collaborating with Anton and the others, they managed to finish it. As he proudly looks at his creation, Dorothea remembers Eden when an enthusiastic Raymond approaches her. She thanks her brother, as everything they achieved is thanks to him. Having had a brilliant idea the previous year, their plans finally came true. As a token of gratitude, Dorothea extends her hand to Raymond because she values his contribution to her dream. Ray grabs his sister and hugs her tightly, not caring about the crowd surrounding them. However, the prince doesn't care what others think because he is proud to have Dorothea as a sister. The princess knows that Rai is someone who believes in his convictions until the end and hugs him affectionately. Eden appears more frequently in high society and dazzles everyone with his musical talent. Everyone praises him so much that even Duke Bronite regrets not having introduced him sooner. Realizing that Eden can do great things, the Duke decides to send him to the episteme, suggesting the boy go to university to follow his older brother. However, Eden, thanking his father for his care, refuses, as his interests have now changed. Furthermore, Eden believes that while Jonathan studies, his parents need a son to help them in the elder's absence. Duke Bront is moved by his son's words. He informs that he feels great pride in him. Attending social gatherings, Eden discovers that the princess did not enroll in the academic school, and even got the lowest grade. Some aristocrats decided she was foolish. However, the originality of the princess entertained Eden, because if she marked all the answers incorrectly, it means she knew all the correct ones. Thinking of the princess, an involuntary smile appeared on the boy's face. He worked hard and changed to become who suited the princess. Raymond happily informs the princess that he managed to rank among the top 50 students, occupying 49th place on the list. Dorothea ironically relates her joy, as this is not the best result for the heir apparent. Theon, who ranked first on this list, notices with satisfaction how the princess has changed, and how bright and cheerful she has become. He gathers courage and suggests that Dorothea travel to Phrygia this summer. Theon comments that Phrygia is a very quiet place with a fog-covered lake. Dorothea remembers how she traveled there with him before her rebirth, thinking she would fare better when she was home. Theon is sure that if the princess goes to Phrygia, the place will become happier. Dorothea doesn't understand why he is so kind to her in this life, where she decided to renounce her love. But she accepts the trip. Raymond happily throws himself onto his friend, embarrassing him for not inviting him to join them. Theon. And so, Dorothy heads to Phrygia, determined that this will be her farewell trip, where she will forever renounce Theon. She and Raymond stare, fascinated at the mist enveloping the city, the result of the pact with the spirit of darkness. Seeing the Frid castle from the window, Dorothy thought the place now looked different from her previous life. She encourages herself to stop worrying and behave naturally. The carriage stops, the door opens, and Theon offers his hand to the princess to help her down. Helping Dorothy out of the carriage, the boy greets her happily at his home. Theon's mother, Duchess Frid, upon greeting the guests, comments that they were very lucky with the weather, since clear days are rare there. Dorothy thanks the Duchess for the welcome and for the rooms prepared for her. And her brother, Ray, who arrives running, grabs the princess's hand and takes her for a walk. Dorothy has been sitting on the bank for an hour, watching the backs of the boys fishing in the lake. Ray is happy to catch a fish, and showing it to his sister, suggests preparing it for dinner. Dorothy looks at her brother tenderly, understanding that she could stay like this for a long time, since Ray enjoys it so much. Suddenly, Julia approaches the boys, who had prepared refreshments for her friends. Raymond brings Dorothy a bucket with his catch, and jokes that he is willing to abdicate the throne to become a fisherman. While Julia tells them stories about Shin's childhood, the boy offers his hand to Dorothy and suggests they fish together. The princess decides to allow herself to dream a little during her last meeting with Theon and offers him her hand in response. Raymond also wants to go fishing, but Julia insists that he eat first. Dorothy watches Theon pull trash out of the lake again and again and confirms that he doesn't know how to fish. He says he only fishes because he likes this lake. Dorothy remembers that in her previous life, she never knew he liked the lake, as he was always silent. Suddenly, Theon announces that fishing is now an opportunity to be alone with the princess. At that moment, Dorothy caught a fish so big that she fears the line will break. Theon hugs her from behind and helps pull the fish off the hook. They lose their balance, and a moment later, Theon ends up on the ground with Dorothy on top. For an accidental moment, their lips brush and the princess looks at him with surprise and fear. Stefan, who is nearby, runs towards them worried in case the princess got hurt. Dorothy assures him that she is fine and asks him not to let the big fish escape. Theon and the princess sit by the bucket with the catch and chat relaxedly about the day. Dorothy doesn't understand why he doesn't talk about the kiss, and it seems he doesn't care. She thinks it was just a coincidence and rejects Eden's proposal to keep fishing. Dorothea asks Stefan to accompany her, explaining that she needs to rest for a moment. The princess lies on the ground, watches the sunset, and thinks she is foolish because she came to forget her feelings. Theon approaches her and wants to talk to the princess about something. He asks Dorothy why she accepted his invitation, as she has always felt that she raises an invisible wall between them. The princess assures Theon that her cold behavior is due only to extreme caution. Thinking that she doesn't want to repeat her past life, Dorothy smiles and says she only wants his happiness. Placing his hand on her shoulder, Theon confesses that he also only wants her happiness. However, she looks at him and remembers the past again and how she destroyed him then. Tears fall from Dorothea's eyes, and Theon doesn't understand why she cries every time he says something like that. He approaches her, dries her eyes with his hand, and asks her to stop crying. It hurts Dorothy that Theon is so sweet to her, but she gathers her strength, as she cannot ruin everything. The princess takes Theon's handkerchief and the little bottle of medicine from her pocket and gives them to him. The boy doesn't understand why Dorothea returns these things to him when she could keep them. Dorothea refuses and, looking at Theon, understands that now she is ready to let him go. She did everything she couldn't in her previous life, and now Theon is sitting in front of her, holding her belongings and promising to keep them. Dorothea believed that saying goodbye to Tom would be painful and she would regret it, but it wasn't like that at all. She is on the balcony looking at the night sky, and suddenly, when she sets her gaze on the brightest star, she remembers Eden's flowers. At dawn, the prince and the princess, accompanied by Stefan, walk through Phrygia before returning to the castle. They chat relaxedly when someone behind them asks them to turn around. In front of them is a girl selling shell jewelry, which are only found in Phrygia. It turns out that the girl makes the jewelry herself, and each one is made with love for someone close. Dorothea buys the jewelry and, approaching Stefan, asks him to lean towards her. The knight leans towards the girl, and she places one of the purchased jewels on his cap. Dorothea also bought gifts for other loved ones, and now happily goes to get ready to go home. A year later, the day of the episteme graduation arrives, and everyone congratulates the prince for finishing his training. Dorothea goes to congratulate her brother with a bouquet of flowers she specially chose for him. Raymond is deeply moved, but Dorothy gets angry with him again for showing emotions in public. The prince boasts to his sister that he is graduating from the episteme, ranking 32nd. And then, a young man on the balcony asks for a moment of attention to announce the start of the diploma awarding ceremony. Dorothea turns and recognizes Theon in the graduate, noticing in her mind how much he has grown since they last saw each other. The princess is happy to realize that after her trip to Phrygia, her unrequited love could turn into a good friend. In the crowd, disorder begins, as everyone looks for a partner for the debutante ball. The Uber debutante ball was an event where all the aristocratic society gathered, and they celebrated it after graduation. Raymond asks his sister if she has chosen a partner yet, but Dorothea doesn't know what to answer. She remembers how in her previous life she couldn't find a partner, and alone, listened to rumors behind her back. Then, Theon offered himself as her partner, declaring himself to the princess and never letting on that he did so reluctantly. Dorothea tells Ray that she can manage without a partner, but he doesn't understand how to attend without a knight. Nereus Pons appears before them and offers to accompany the princess. Dorothea looks directly at Nereus and informs him that she does not want to make a decision yet. However, he is sure that in her position, it won't be hard for the princess to find someone better than him. So he came to the aid of someone who needed him. At that moment, a familiar hand rests on Dorothea's shoulder, and she hears a familiar voice behind her. Hugging her by the shoulders, Eden tells her that the princess already has a partner for tonight. Eden leans towards her and kisses her on the forehead. They have been separated for a long time, and he missed her. He hopes she remembers her promise, as the princess hadn't written to him and he feared she had forgotten. Dorothea tries to convince Eden that she hadn't forgotten, and the boy hugs her again. Witnessing the scene, Raymond furiously throws himself at Eden and pushes him away from Dorothea. Eden apologizes and introduces himself to the prince as the younger son of Duke Bront. Nereus is furious, as an unimportant poor guy is taking his partner. He scolds Eden that he is not even a student and has no right to be at the graduation ball. Nereus mocks Eden, but the latter calmly and worthily responds to every joke. He did not attend the academy and did not learn to attack people or overcome others. Nereus, without holding back, slaps Eden. Dorothea screams scared. Raymond steps between Eden and him. He assumes Nereus still harbors resentment over Dorothea's past defeat. The prince expels pawns, who leaves gritting his teeth and promises there will not be a next time. Dorothea worries about Eden. Her cheek burns with the mark of the slap. The princess, under the pretext that she needs to speak with Eden, takes him aside. They now maintain an awkward silence while waiting for the doctor. Dorothea starts talking about Nereus, but Eden interrupts her, intrigued as to whether she missed him. The princess reflects on how she always remembered him, with sadness or joy. Dorothea asks him why he didn't write to her, and discovers that Eden believed the time wasn't right yet to get closer to her. She assures Eden that she still wants him to be her partner and asks him the same question. Placing his hand on the princess's cheek, Eden confesses to Dorothea that since their first meeting, and until now, he had wanted to be alone with her. Before, these words would have moved her greatly, but now she remembers some episodes from her past life. She remembers how, in that life, Eden assured her that she had the right to obtain whatever she desired. And only she could become empress. Dorothea rejects him, claiming that she knows why he needs all that, but assures him it's not as useful to her as he thinks. The princess thinks that Eden chose her to forget his only complex, despite her beauty and skills, the status of a lover's son. Dorothea sees no point in a princess being treated worse than an illegitimate son, and that's why she cannot give him what he wants. Holding the princess, Eden convinces her that no one is more beautiful than her, and that he is only saying nonsense. Dorothea believes Eden overvalues her, and that sooner or later he will be disappointed, so she rejects him and leaves. However, Eden thinks that it is not greed speaking in the princess, but her goals, and hopes so she stops, surprised. Dorothea still doesn't understand why he pays her so much attention. He just smiles and promises her that she will soon understand it for herself. The emperor called Dorothea, but he has been silent for half an hour, pretending to be busy. The princess sits down, mentally reviewing all the possible reasons why Karen called her for the first time since that day. Suddenly, a servant enters the room with a wooden box in his hands. He opens the box and takes out a wine with a label bearing the name Dorothea Milaneo. The emperor reminds Dorothea that as a child, she asked him to make a wine in her honor. And now her name appears on 100,000 bottles. Dorothea is furious because Carnot did not allocate funds for her project, but spent them on 100,000 bottles. But she clenches her fists and thanks him anyway. The emperor affirms that Dorothea must dispose of the wine herself, and if she refuses, he will throw it into the rivers. The princess finds it a great waste and thinks Carnon is testing her. But she doesn't understand why he needs to test her, when he simply gave her a gift for her debutante ball. Dorothea sits in her room, mentally reviewing her meeting with the emperor, and she thinks he is behaving strangely. The princess tastes the wine and likes it so much that she feels sorry giving it to the aristocrats. She decides then to use the wine for a good cause. She gives the box of wine to the knights of the Imperial Guard, who often make sarcastic comments to the princess. Suddenly, Stefan appears among them and orders them to maintain respect for the Milaneo surname. While getting ready for the debutante ball, Dorothy surprisingly tells Clara that she donated all the bottles of wine to charity. She also gave the wine to the Order of Chivalry and hopes Stefan likes the gift. In addition, she left some for Clara and her family. Clara thinks the princess chose a dress that is too simple for the debutante ball. To deflect the topic of her dress, Dorothea asks the maid if there are feelings between her and Stefan. While Clara stutters something embarrassed in her defense, Dorothea flees the room. The princess enters the hall convinced that no one will notice her appearance. However, all the curious glances of the assembled aristocrats are directed straight at her. Eden approaches Dorothea and offers her his hand, and the young woman even feels a little nervous about so much formality. From one side, Theon silently observes the couple chatting kindly. Julia approaches the boy to make sure everything is fine, and he affirms that he is just nervous. Theon confesses that it is an honor for him to be Julia's partner at the debutante ball. Dorothea walks through the festive hall next to Theon, and behind her, rumors are heard about her simple dress. Julia is sure that people are murmuring out of envy. And if Ray, who arrives late, were here, he would be very angry. The girl thinks that Dorothea and Eden look wonderful, but Theon does not answer Julia, and only watches her in silence. The ball opening begins, and the emperor, upon appearing before the public, invokes the spirit of light in front of everyone. Eden sees the spirit of light for the first time, but is completely indifferent to what he observes. He believes there is nothing extraordinary about the spirit, even though legends are attributed to it. Although Dorothea understands that it is not good to speak of the gift like that, she is even a little happy that Eden called it something common. The inauguration ended, and she tries to escape the insistent crowd that won't stop reminding her of her inability to summon the spirit of light. However, Eden immediately appears and assures everyone that the princess has this ability, since she herself shines like the spirit of light. Going out onto the balcony, Dorothea thanks Eden for intervening and defending her. The princess notices that he now knows her situation and must understand that he cannot give her anything. However, just as Eden is about to convince her again, she turns around recognizing the familiar voice of Theon. Turning, Dorothea sees Theon next to Julia, who came to congratulate her on her debut. Thanking them, the young woman perceives a strange feeling. She no longer feels repulsion towards Julia as before. Eden takes Dorothea's hand and asks Theon if he will return to Phrygia, as he has also finished the academy. However, Theon informs that he plans to stay in Lampus, as he still has much to learn. The presentation of the debutantes begins, and Eden, taking the princess's hand again, leads her to the hall. Returning to the celebration, Dorothea watches Eden dance and notices that he does it very well. That's why everyone silently watches him with curiosity. Nereus watches him resentfully, as he believes it should be him, not the mixed-race Eden, who is the center of attention. That's why Nereus wrinkles the carpet under his feet before Princess Dorothea starts her dance, trying to humiliate her alongside Eden. Approaching the princess, Eden takes her hand to invite her to dance. The crowd parts to give them space, and the duo begins their dance. Dorothea cannot shake the feeling that she is flying, because she feels so calm next to Eden. And she understands that she cannot resist his charm. The boy admits that, after all, there are things he cannot achieve, like conquering the princess's heart. Eden notices the folded rug and understands that it was done on purpose for someone to trip and fall. Without losing composure, he gently guides her away from there so she won't trip. And she also notices the fold in the rug. The emperor enters the hall and watches his daughter dance with Eden. Meanwhile, Julia is very worried because Theon's condition has worsened again. Eden asks Dorothea if she has ever thought about wanting to rule the spirit of light. Receiving an affirmative answer, the one he expected, the boy spins the princess further. And suddenly, the space around them lights up with sparks of light. Suddenly, the light in the hall goes out, and Dorothea is scared, remembering that the same thing happened in her past life. However, the sparks around the dancers are so intense that they illuminate the entire hall with the spirit of light. And Dorothea doesn't understand what is happening. While continuing to spin her, Eden tries to convince the princess that she is the true heir to the throne. He assures her that she is the right candidate to be empress, and those present are impressed that the princess managed to summon the spirit of light. Going out onto the balcony, Dorothea demands that he confess that the spirit of light is his work. Brushing her hair with his lips, he confesses that he only wanted to show the fools that she is worthy of the throne. The girl furiously pushes him away and asks him to stop. During the dance, at one point, her heart beat strongly, and she thought she had actually managed to summon a spirit. However, realizing it wasn't her own strength, she was deeply disappointed. Who, if not Eden, should know that feeling? Dorothea demands that the boy confess where he got such strength, as she is sure she wasn't the one who summoned the spirit. After a moment of silence, Eden reaches into his pocket and pulls out a summoning crystal. Kneeling before the princess, he hands it to her, asking her to use it. He clarifies that he couldn't give her the stone before, during the execution, which is why he does it now. The young woman is surprised, as it turns out that Eden also returned to the past, just like her. But he corrects the young woman, since, more accurately, it was he who asked for time to be returned for both of them. Eden decides to tell her the whole truth about what really happened, starting from the time he was small. And week before his return, Jonathan made fun of him and treated him with disdain, and Eden could do nothing about it. But soon he had a magnificent opportunity. It was the day they left home with his brother, and Jonathan stated that he didn't want to be paired with Eden. And he didn't assign him a horse. Perhaps if he had given the horse to his brother at that moment, everything would have been different. But the horse broke into a trot. And the next instant, Jonathan was hanging over the precipice, furiously screaming at Eden to pull him out. Eden knew that by himself he could not rescue his brother, and both could fall together. The rope was not long enough to tie it to a tree, and Jonathan, instead of asking for help, simply kept insulting. Eden looked at his brother, turned around and left, promising to call someone for help. When help arrived, it turned out that Jonathan had already fallen off the cliff and crashed. And from that moment, Eden became the sole heir to Bront. Since then, the feeling of belonging to the whole world did not leave the boy. Since he saw how people who previously scorned him suddenly started flattering him. It was then that he began his tricks of dropping handkerchiefs and watched how stupid girls ran to pick them up. Once, Dorothea surprised him while he was doing this, and she found what he was doing amusing. Then the boy understood for the first time that someone understood his malicious jokes, and that both were alike. Not knowing that the princess was in front of him, he introduced himself to her and asked her to tell him her name. He was very surprised to discover that the princess herself was in front of him, but even more so when she offered him a job in her palace. He accepted, as Eden saw hidden abilities in the princess that no one else perceived. He believes that her inability to summon spirits is a consequence of her perfection. Eden was sure that their encounter had been arranged by destiny, and he was willing to give everything for the one he loved. It didn't matter to him how he achieved what he wanted. He was willing to sacrifice people if necessary. Eden received news that Theon had become the princess's fiancé through deception, and he was willing to kill him. Somehow he found out that Theon was doing it not for love, but to get closer to Raymond, or rather to the spirit of light. Theon didn't understand where Eden got this information, but he himself understood everything. Since after so many years, a child with red eyes was born in the freed family, and there was a high probability that the spirit of darkness had awakened with him. Since it is not possible to be in the palace, even if you belong to Raymond's close circle, the best way to remain there is to marry the princess. However, Eden already knew that Dorothea would kill her brother and would soon take over the throne. Theon understood that the Chancellor does not kill him, since after Raymond's death, his end also awaits him. Eden was sure that Dorothea's husband would not tell her anything, because otherwise he would have to admit that he married her for personal interest. Eden left the room, while Theon reflected on how everything had ended up like this, since he actually tried to tell her several times. However, seeing her love, he could not do it. Since that day, some time passed, and rumors began to circulate that Dorothea's army had destroyed the King-Emperor's forces. This event was called the Princess Rebellion, and they demanded that she prove her right to the throne by summoning the spirit of light. After Raymond's death, her insomnia worsened. She looked terribly exhausted. Eden didn't know how to help her, but he insisted on convincing her that she was precisely the one who should be empress. So she gathered her knights and sent them to search for the Stone of Light, considered the source of spiritual strength. A little earlier, Julia went in search of the stone to help her beloved Theon. Since they knew, the knights searched everywhere to snatch the stone from her. Upon learning in the market that they were looking for her, she hurried to the place where she had agreed to meet a friend who was supposed to take her to Theon. However, Eden was already waiting for him there, with a sharp knife ready in his hand. He knew the agreed meeting place, as Julia had written to Theon. And the Chancellor intercepted all their letters on Dorothy's initiative. Just as Eden was about to hand over the crystal, he witnessed the scene between the princess and her husband. Seeing Dorothy's love for Theon, Eden decided not to give her the crystal, as this would prolong the life of his rival. Something that was not in his interest. He only comforted her once more, promising her that someday everything would be hers. Eden understood that Dorothy needed love and he could give it to her, but she only cared about Theon. A short time later, the garden that Dorothy had planted for Theon became completely corrupted, and nothing ever bloomed there again. Eden was furious that even near his death, Theon left a feeling of guilt in the princess's heart. Theon learned that Eden had killed Julia, and for that reason, he decided not to reveal his secret to the princess so that Eden would continue to suffer. After a short time, Theonfrid took his own life in the princess's room. Then, Eden understood that this had been the perfect revenge that Theon was capable of. Barely a few months after Theon's death, Dorothy's courtiers decided to found a new state. They were furious at the fact that the Empress lay weak in her bed while the empire was sinking. The courtiers feared that the empire could be attacked at any time, as Eubora was in a very unstable situation. The people were rising in rebellion, while famine reigned in the empire. And plague, and the Empress was blamed for all of this. The courtiers told Eden that they intended to overthrow the tyrant and replace her with a new ruler, whom they saw in the Chancellor himself. Hearing this, the Chancellor asserted that he would recognize no other ruler than Dorothea Milaneo. Eden was always by the Empress's bedside, who continued to suffer from the loss of her deceased husband. After some time, Dorothea got out of bed, but it proved impossible to calm the enraged people, who demanded her execution. Eden begged the young woman to marry him, and he would do everything possible to stop the furious people. In response, Dorothea allowed him to do whatever he wanted, but she could not marry him. And when the rebels burst into the castle to arrest the Empress, Eden could do nothing to help her. With a heavy heart, she headed to the trial site under the shouts of the crowd, who wanted him as the new emperor. Sitting next to her, he did not lose hope that the young woman would ask for clemency. But Dorothea refused to live without Theon. She acknowledged that she had been a villain and had failed, and wished Eden Heights as the new ruler. Then, the Chancellor decided to try to help her one last time, and offered her the crystal of the spirit of light. But the Empress rejected the offered prerogative, and Eden, with tears in his eyes, watched as her head was cut off. He couldn't stand the scene anymore and fled from there, running without looking around, feeling that his heart would soon break. Because seeing Dorothy's death, Eden experienced firsthand what the young woman had felt upon seeing the death of her beloved. Now he understood that he should have given her the crystal back then and simply observed her happiness next to her husband. Perhaps if he hadn't desired more at that moment, his beloved would still be alive, and in the end, he would have regretted his choice. At the moment Eden was weeping on the lake shore, the crystal suddenly lit up with a bright glow. And he understood that a hand was being extended to him that would help him. Rux, Queen of the Spirits of Light, appeared before Eden, discovering that all the Milaneos were now dead. She proposed to the boy to sign a new contract with her, the Blood Pact. Hearing this proposal, Eden got angry, as Rux could have presented herself to Dorothea Milaneo. But she didn't. The Queen clarified that the Milaneo blood was no longer pure, as Dorothea was the first not to be able to summon spirits. Rux continued to insist on signing the contract with her, and promised to reward the spirit summoner with the power of light. However, Eden saw no point even in the sun shining, because his sun, in the form of Dorothea, had already set, and he only wished he could see her again. Therefore, he promised Rux to sign the contract with her if the Queen resurrected Dorothea. But Rux could not do it, because by bringing the young woman back to life, she would impede the power of Kais, King of the Spirits of Darkness. Furthermore, resurrecting the dead could harm time, both general time and Eden's personal time. However, for the boy all that didn't matter. He was willing to endure all his childhood torments again, just to resurrect Dorothea. Then, the Queen finally agreed to sign a new contract with Eden, on the condition that he returned to his dark past. And so, when he opened his eyes, he realized that he had truly returned to the past, to the place where he grew up. And that meant only one thing. The princess was alive again, So, Eden decided that in this life it would be better not to know the princess. He was even glad that he couldn't enter the academy because of that incident on the road. It was precisely when he definitively decided not to desire anything else in his life, just to make the princess happy. When he met her by chance on the beach, everything happened differently and their destinies remained intertwined, even in this life. After finishing his story, Eden confesses that he hoped Dorothy would remember nothing of her previous life. The young woman understands that thanks to him, she had the opportunity to start over, something she previously thought was just words to gain power. Her eyes filled with tears, because now she saw him in a completely different light. Drying her tears and kneeling before her, Eden hands her the spirit stone. Because he always will be, and will be her only empress. He wants her to reach the highest place and shine brightly, not out of ambition, but out of love. Eden hugs the young woman and confesses his feelings to her, and everything around him lights up with the glow of the spirit of light. Dorothea thanks the boy for everything he did for her, but she does not want to accept the crystal, since she feels unworthy after everything she did in the past. As they argue about whether the princess deserves to be empress, her father calls her. The emperor is angry because the young woman hid that she could summon the spirit of light. The princess insists that she doesn't know how to do it and doesn't understand how it happened during the dance. Karnan orders her to demonstrate her abilities anyway. And Dorothy notices that his gaze has changed. Before, he always looked at her with disdain, but now that Karnan believes his daughter possesses strength, he feels interest towards her. Dorothea admits that she cannot summon the spirit of light, but the emperor, with an altered expression, orders her to prove her worth. The girl doesn't understand why it matters so much to him that she possesses spiritual power, when Prince Raymond exists, and his strength could only be an obstacle for him. This is enough for Karnan to stop listening to rumors about the end of the Milaneo dynasty. Since Dorothea is the same child that Elise gave birth to with her life, he cannot allow the entire dynasty to end. And she must prove that the empress's death was not in vain. Turning towards the window, Karnan orders his daughter to learn from Raymond how to handle spirits, but without taking too much of his time. The emperor is sure that if Dorothea acquires this gift, the rumors about the decline of the imperial family will cease. Sitting in the garden after the conversation with her father, Dorothea mentally repeats his words. Now she must fulfill her obligations, as befits a member of the Milaneo family. Looking at the crystal in her hands, she remembers that Eden is a contractor. Therefore, she can summon the spirit with the stone as long as he is near. He promised her that he would always be near, so that she could summon the light at any time. As she sinks into these thoughts, Raymond catches up with his sister, running happily to congratulate her on her abilities. The Lenesker Palace was one of many used by Ellis. It remained empty after her death, but now Dorothea will live there by Karnan's order. Ray is amazed by his sister's immense strength and excited by the way people watched her when she summoned spiritual power. Dorothy admits to her brother that she didn't want to use this power, but he knows it himself. Since he noticed her surprise, Raymond asks his sister not to be so serious. After all, she has only acquired the power to control spirits, and that is enough. There is no need to complicate things further. When Eden approaches them, the princess apologizes to her brother to speak alone with the boy. Moving aside, she offers the crystal to Eden and asks him to return it to her. She admits that she does not want to become empress, and he is very surprised, as Eden thought that everything Dorothy desired was to become empress and live happily alongside her loved ones. But the girl does not want the past to repeat itself, and she will not allow the slightest opportunity for it. Eden insists that with this crystal, Dorothea will be able to take revenge for all the disdain she suffered. And everyone will see in her a worthy heir to occupy the throne. The princess apologizes to the boy. She says she still has a long way to go, since even he, not being a Milaneo, can handle spirits. Eden expected her to be happy to obtain this power, as he really didn't want to make more mistakes. The boy had wanted to give it to her several times, but if she had needed it and he hadn't been around, she could have gotten into trouble. That's why he waited for the opportunity to debut in society, to be able to stay in Lampa permanently. But it turned out to be all in vain. He takes the princess by the hand and suggests taking her back to the hall, where everyone is already waiting for them for the party. And Poe must serve the cake. Raymond is very worried about Theon's condition, but his friend assures him that everything is fine now. He understands that the blackout during Dorothy's debut was precisely because of him. Theon apologizes to the prince for not being able to hold out until his arrival, since his condition was so serious that for a moment he couldn't control the spirit of darkness. Raymond also apologizes for not arriving sooner to be with his friend. But thanks to the princess's spirit, everything was resolved. Raymond happily announces to his friends that Dorothea will soon move to another palace. Gullia is worried that the princess possesses such a powerful force, as she could now claim the throne. Raymond knows that Dorothy always reacts intensely to conversations about the throne. But he thinks there is nothing to worry about. The prince has always considered his sister very intelligent, so he will not be surprised if she becomes empress. Julia does not understand how he can speak so calmly, as Raymond could lose the throne. The prince replies with a smile that, although he doesn't know what Dorothy wants, he knows himself perfectly. Entering the hall on Eden's arm, the princess notices that the audience has changed. The gazes directed at her express not curiosity or interest, but strong tension. Dorothea understands that they think she could become the next empress. Nereus approaches and applauds the fact that the princess has always been able to calm spirits, but hid them. The girl insists it was accidental, but Nereus does not believe that the blackout and its glow were coincidence. Those gathered around her ask her to repeat her dance and compliment her. Dorothea feels firsthand how an enemy who is only pointing a knife at you can suddenly appear by your side, while a friend who seemed to be always by your side can suddenly betray you. Nereus makes a toast in honor of the princess, and those gathered around her congratulate her. Raising her glass, Dorothea thanks everyone for the congratulations and asks them to drink and have fun like they scorned her all this time. Emptying her glass, she smiles and affirms that it was a joke. So she asks them to relax and have fun, without forgetting that the princess wanted to try the cake and then leave the hall immediately. Eden brought her a piece. The young woman is moved to notice how much attention he pays to everything she says and to all her wishes. Stefan accidentally overhears a conversation among other knights about how lucky he is to serve the princess, since his promotion will also benefit them. The knight sees no reason to even respond to them. He is very happy that everyone finally recognizes Dorothea. Sitting in the carriage next to Eden, the princess remembers how, in her past life, she did her handkerchief tricks. Today she remembered that moment when she gave the toast, as then she realized that she hadn't really changed. The young woman wants to know why Eden hid Theon's secret, as now everything could have been different. She doesn't understand why he decided to confess now, when he could have kept the secret forever. Taking the princess's hand, Eden confesses that he couldn't stand seeing her carrying the weight of sin for the prince's death. And Theon, although it seems to the princess that she hasn't changed, Eden doesn't think so. He offers to use his strength to be with Theon and live happily with him, because that is precisely why Aiden returned. Even if he is destined to love her for life, he will always be close for her sake, so that she can use her strength. Upon arriving at the castle, Aiden asks for permission to accompany her one last time and offers his hand to the princess. At the door of the house, her loved ones await her: Stefan, Clara, Joe, and Poe. Taking Eden's hand, Dorothea hopes this day will not leave her with bad memories. The princess approaches her close ones, wishes the boy a good trip, and asks him to be careful. The girl enters the castle, where everyone greets her joyfully and congratulates her with applause for her debut. Paul offers her a cake prepared especially in honor of the princess. They congratulate her as well as the people in the palace did, but now she feels calm. And she doesn't want to lose these valuable emotions. She understands that she will be much happier staying with the people she loves and not being empress, and that is enough for her. After the celebration, Dorothy lies on the bed and finds the crystal of the spirit of light in her pocket. She goes out onto the balcony and is surprised, thinking only of Eden, even though this crystal could help her be with Theon. Eden takes a shower after a complicated day and reflects on how everything has ended. When he returned, he thought the princess remembered nothing of the past and believed he would have a chance someday. Upon seeing Frida's handkerchief in his room, he understood that in this life he would have no chance. Eden always tried to be close to Dorothy, but the girl's gaze was always fixed on Zion. In reality, he didn't want to hand over the stone. He thought that Dorothy would abandon him forever upon receiving it. In the end, he gave her the crystal and did everything within his power. But everything is over now. His father and stepmother knock on Eden's door, and he gets dressed to open it for them. They ask how the princess's debut party was, and it is noticeable that Bront is happy that her son was Dorothy's partner. Eden tells his parents that he is tired and apologizes, but as he turns to go to bed, suddenly he hears his brother's voice behind him. Jonathan is in his room and looks at him with an angry look, while Eden asks him to leave. Jonathan is convinced that his brother behaves so arrogantly because he hides behind the princess's dress. Eden keeps insisting that he is tired and asks him to leave him alone, but Jonathan pushes him. He yells that Eden's life won't change just because he went to a party once with the princess, since he is only an illegitimate son. Bending over him, Eden tells him that, unlike him, Jonathan has nothing left but lineage. Therefore, he must take care of it and know how to treat people. The boy orders his brother to control his words from now on, and he kicks him out of his room. Sitting on his bed, the tired Eden thinks about what to do now, as he achieved his goal. And he has nothing left to aspire to. Suddenly noticing the glow of the spirit of light around him, he clearly feels that the princess is calling the spirits. He thinks she is showing off her abilities in the palace, but in reality, she is just on the balcony thinking about him. With his hands on his chest, Eden hopes she feels him as much as he feels her. After a while, Duke Bront and his wife arrive at the emperor's palace to present their son to him. Jonathan greets the emperor and tells him that he has just finished the academy. Eden enters the room and introduces himself as the younger son of the Bront family. Karen notices that the boy not only has a distinguished appearance. In all his movements, a level of education is perceived, and he is completely different from his older brother. The emperor remembers that Eden was Dorothy's dance partner and asks how long they have known each other. Upon learning that the princess and Eden met in Narration, Karen asks if she summoned the spirit power there. To protect the princess from trouble, Eden replies that he saw Dorothea summon spirits for the first time at the ball. Karen observes the boy, who shows no sign of nervousness or fear, thinking he must be careful with him. The Duke, taking the opportunity, decides to tell how the princess remained friends with Eden in Narration and spent a lot of time with him. Jonathan gets angry seeing that they are only talking about his brother again, as they came here to present himself to the emperor. Noticing his son's discontent, the Duchess begins to praise Jonathan in front of Karnan. Bowing, the boy communicates his desire to serve the emperor and gain experience as the future head of House Bront. However, Karnan turns away, stating that Lampses is not a place to educate family leaders. The parents are impressed by Eden's attitude towards the emperor, and he thanks them for their good treatment. Looking at his brother, Eden feels sorry for him, as he could have boasted about his graduation from Epistemion. But he only got into trouble. He pats Jonathan on the shoulder to thank him for bringing him to Lampses. But the boy rejects his hand. The parents ask them not to fight, and Eden understands that they want him to marry Dorothea and help Jonathan find his place in society. However, Eden considers these expectations excessive, as none of that fits into his plans. The moment Eden thinks about how he would like to see Dorothea again, she suddenly appears in the room. He is very surprised, as the princess has expressed the desire to speak with a boy alone. After saying goodbye to the Duke and his wife and wishing them a good trip, the girl asks Eden to follow her to a separate room. Passing by the courtiers, Eden overhears admiring comments directed at him. and realizes that before he enjoyed such attention, but now it only embarrasses him. As they walked, the princess did not turn to him once, so the boy feels that she rejected him that way. Sitting on the sofa, Dorothea invites Aiden to sit opposite, and he gets nervous, not understanding what she wants to talk to him about. The young woman admits that throughout this time, she thought this second life was a punishment for being a tyrant. That constantly tortured her, as she was the only one who remembered the entire past. And she didn't have a chance for redemption. As soon as she felt joy, she convinced herself that she couldn't enjoy it, as she had made so many people unhappy. Upon hearing this, Eden understands that all the love and sacrifices he dedicated to her were nothing more than suffering for her. And he didn't even suspect what her true desire was or what she was striving for. However, suddenly, Dorothea admits that now she has changed her mind, and this life was a new opportunity that Eden gave her. The boy listens in amazement that the princess, without mentioning names, told her story to her brother. It turns out that, after thinking a little, Raimundo supposed that whoever gave someone a new chance at life also deserved a second chance. Standing up, the girl acknowledges that she now understands that thanks to Eden, she learned her brother's thoughts and saved Taeon. Thanks to him, she also met Stefan, Clara, Joe, and Poe, and had the opportunity to protect those people dear to her. The princess hugs him, asks for forgiveness, and thanks him for everything. The boy's eyes fill with tears. Eden buries his nose in the princess's shoulder and hugs her tightly, pulling her close to him. He blushes, realizing that he cried in front of Dorothea, and the young woman sees him for the first time so sincere and even adorable. He admits that her gaze makes him nervous, although Dorothea observes him and thinks that she knew him differently before. He was a perfect, beautiful but dangerous person, and that's why so attractive. But he also felt regret for life. He made sacrifices for her and cried because of her guilt. And the young woman doesn't understand how someone can change so much. Dorothea leans next to him on the sofa and approaches his face to ask him if he likes her. He admits that he does, and his cheeks turn red. She still cannot believe that someone can love her so much. Eden takes her hand and places it against his chest, where his heart beats wildly. He confesses to her that despite promising himself not to love her while she loved another, he couldn't keep it. He caresses her face, and she still cannot believe that someone loves her so much. Eden heard that Dorothea refused to become empress and wants to know her plans for the future. She admits that she only wants to live in peace. In her previous life, others suffered because of her, and now she wants to do it right. Eden is happy about her decision. It is exactly what Dorothea desires deep down, and that is why she must follow this path. Remembering something, Eden puts his hand in his pocket, takes out a pendant, and hands it to the princess. He realized that the crystal was impractical to carry, so he commissioned this pendant to store it inside. Eden places the locket around her neck, and Dorothy feels like her heart is about to burst out of her chest. The boy remembers how as a child she refused to accept an expensive gift from him, because at that time they were not close enough. Eden wishes the princess a good day and leaves, while Stefan and Clara enter the room. And Clara cannot hide her enthusiasm for the gift. Dorothea is surprised by the maid's confession that she had noticed for some time that the princess likes Eden. Clara says that it always seemed to her that since childhood, he had the eyes of an adult man who had already suffered the pain of love. The maid strongly advises her mistress to act only according to her heart's command, and no longer listen to anyone else. Raymond comes to his father, who has been waiting for him for a long time in his office. Karnan is very angry with his son because he arrived late, and the emperor asked him to bring a plan to increase wheat production in the Barajan region. While standing before the emperor, Raymond says he plans to change the type of wheat to increase production by 5 tons. But Karnan is not satisfied with his idea because, considering the population of Barajan, there is not that much land available to produce wheat. He doesn't like any of Raymond's ideas and wants his son to do everything possible if he wants to continue ruling the empire. After meeting with Karnan, the prince has another meeting waiting and is depressed, because it seemed to him that, after graduating from the academy, he could breathe easy. However, he has now officially entered state affairs, so nobles from all provinces are lining up to meet him. Raymond finds it difficult to accept that he cannot even manage agriculture in something that he believed he understood well. He thinks with regret that a week has already passed since the last time he was in his vegetable garden. Upon meeting his brother, the princess notices that he looks very tired. Raymond is deeply moved that Dorothea noticed this, but she insists that she only worries because his fatigue could affect state affairs. Edda does not understand why Dorothea has not used the soul stone yet. Every day she sat and waited. But since that day, the princess never used the stone again. The boy does not understand what kind of relationship he has with the princess now and whether he should go see her or wait for her to come. He also doesn't know if he should smile kindly and talk to her, or if Dorothea prefers to keep her distance. The main thing he doesn't understand is whether his love still has a chance. However, in any case, he wants to follow the same path as her, and therefore, he must live honestly from now on. Standing by the window, Eden notices that people who want to see him have gathered below, and he goes down to meet them. It turns out they are servants of various girls who have sent him gifts. The boy thanks them for the gifts, since refusing them would be impolitic, but asks them not to do it again. Suddenly, a red-haired girl gets out of the carriage and walks straight to Eden. The boy recognizes her as Monica Affinita, and she hands him a letter to read. Monica was engaged to Nereus Hark, and at that moment, she should already be discussing the main details of the wedding. In Monica's family, there were no reasons to refuse the marriage to Prince Hark, and therefore, everything was decided beforehand. Before Eden returned, she really liked seeing how he showed his attention towards him. Thanks to talking with her, he obtained information about Hark, and he liked that she herself made fun of Nereus. To earn Eden's trust, she was willing to reveal her secrets and admitted that she did not want to marry Hark. Realizing that the girl was about to confess her love to him, Eden asked her not to say something he couldn't answer for. The boy was convinced that Monica wanted to break the engagement and used him for that reason. However, the only suitors comparable to Prince Hark's level were Raymond and Theon. Eden announced that he did not want to be the center of a scandal in this way, and the young woman looked at him resentfully and walked away. However, after some time, Monica and Nereus canceled the engagement, and the fiancé accused Eden of the breakup. When Nereus ascended the throne, he attacked the empire of Eubera, and perhaps the end of the engagement was just a pretext for the offensive. Now, in front of him, this woman is offering him a letter that Eden promises to read carefully. In the letter, Monica invites Eden to dinner at the Caro restaurant next week, since she needs to talk to him. The boy did not like the insistent tone of the message, and convinced himself again that she still lacked tact and good manners. Eden tears up the letter. Because precisely for this reason, Monica and Nereus separated in the past life and the war began. Dorothea does not understand why Raymond always comes to her room to rest. Looking sweetly at his sister and smiling at her, the prince confesses that he relaxes when he sees her face. The prince recalls how Dorothy used to get angry with him when he acted inappropriately for an heir. And read that. Before, Dorothy believed that to become emperor, she had to be perfect. But now, she understands that a true authority does not always help. Now she wants Ray to relax with her and leave his authority aside a bit. Because even a prince needs breaks. Raimundo complains to his sister that he has more pending tasks, and the emperor wants him to help him increase wheat production. However, the more the prince thinks, the fewer ideas come to his head because the land is bad. And not even a triple rotation will work. After thinking for a moment, Dorothy tells her brother that she once heard how a country solved similar tasks. There they alternated crops that required different levels of soil fertility, which increased the crop yield. The young woman recommends the prince to follow that example, and he is happy, surprised not to have thought of it before. Raimundo thanks his sister for the advice and for helping him conserve energy. The prince realizes again that Dorothy would be better suited for the role of empress than him. even though she hates it when he mentions it. The young woman confesses to her brother that she wants to resume fencing and asks him to help her with that. Stefan goes to the captain of the Radiant Knights, Archero, who called him. The captain praises Stefan for protecting the princess for so long and plans to name him his vice-captain. However, this means the knight must stop being Dorothy's personal guard. And from now on, he will work for honor. While taking care of the garden, Stefan reflects on the captain's offer, surprised that they want to improve his position without exams. But the boy doesn't understand what the point of being a knight is if he cannot advance by his own means. Suddenly, Dorothea attacks Stefan from behind, but the boy reacts quickly and snatches the sword from her hands. Despite the slight pain caused, he admits that he is the best knight and that he had no chance to hit him. Noticing that Stefan has been training since dawn, Dorothea understands that something worries him. And she asks him about it. She heard that he wants to be named Deputy Director of the Order and doesn't understand why he is saddened. After all, it is good news. The princess assures Stefan that he deserves that position even without her, and advises him to seize the opportunity. She asks him to trust her words and move forward, because she cares about him a lot and wants everything to go well for him. Stefan thinks that 10 years ago the princess was very young and barely reached his waist. Now she stands firmly on her feet and talks to him. There is no trace of that weak princess who could fall at any moment. Before, he saw her as a child taking his first steps, but now she has grown up and he has just realized. Dorothea is already moving forward, and he is still in the same place. Realizing all this, Stefan kneels before her as a sign of gratitude. After a while, the initiation ceremony took place, which, of course, the princess attended. She still finds it unpleasant to be among aristocrats, but tries to smile and answer everyone politely. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls Dorothea, and turning around, she sees Taeon, who is looking for her on the prince's orders. The boy offers his hand to the princess to accompany her to see her brother. Dorothea takes Taeon's hand and starts the way towards Raymond, thinking that now that she knows all the details about him, he seems different. Before, when she only focused on her emotions, she hadn't noticed his strengths. The princess doesn't understand how she could have loved Taeon without really knowing anything about him. After walking a little further, Dorothea discovers that Raymond was not actually looking for her. And she asks why Taeon lied to her. Ashamed, the boy apologizes for using the prince as an excuse, as he felt she was uncomfortable among those people. Dorothea realizes that, suddenly, she is no longer happy that Taeon shows concern for her. Suddenly, the boy suggests having dinner with her this week, as he has something important to tell her. Leaning towards her, he confesses that for this conversation, he needs to be alone with her. He explains that on the day of her debut, an urgent matter arose, so he couldn't congratulate her as he should have. Dorothea understands that on that day Taeon was feeling unwell because of the dark spirit. And that's why the light in the hall went out. After Eden gave the princess the summoning stone, the young woman began researching materials related to spirits. She learned that any force tends to erupt if there is too much of it. And the forces of light and darkness balance each other. Then, Dorothea understood that Taeon married her precisely because of that, as he could not handle the force of darkness alone. Sometimes he did it through Raymond. That's why Dorothea hated her brother. It seemed to her that he was taking her husband away from her. Determined that Taeon plans to tell her about the dark force at the meeting, the princess agrees to meet him at a restaurant. Clara runs in and informs Dorothy about the start of the ceremony, carrying a wrapping paper that the princess had asked her to find. The young woman approaches Stefan, happy not to have been late, and hands him the wrapping paper. Upon unrolling it, Stefan is surprised to discover the sword Esther Callicipes. In her past life, Dorothy enjoyed collecting famous swords, and one of them was precisely this one. Stefan accepts the gift gratefully, as it is the first sword the princess has given to her knight. Suddenly, Stefan takes a brooch out of his pocket that Dorothy had given him once, and offers it to the princess. The young woman thinks he is returning it to her, but the next instant he points to his chest, asking her to pin it on his vest. Clara, approaching, hurries to adjust Stefan's uniform and comments on how wonderful he looks. Taking the young woman's hand, the knight bows and kisses her, saying she always looks beautiful, which makes her feel very self-conscious. Seeing Stefan receive the emperor's order, Dorothy understands how people feel when they are happy for their loved ones. In addition to Stefan's promotion, the emperor also knighted Joe, who had been training tirelessly all this time.